I am taking half your millions, Keisha, including your grandmother's estate. Darnell leaned into the microphone, his voice booming through the courtroom with the confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. He adjusted the lapels of the custom Italian suit that I had paid for and flashed a grin at the gallery. The courtroom erupted in whispers. My husband was demanding 50% of the Rose Trust, a private fund he claimed was worth $20 million. In the front row, his sister-in-law Tiffany sat with her legs crossed, smirking at me like she had already spent the money in her head. She mouthed the words, "You lose to me." I sat perfectly still at the defendant table. My hands were folded over a simple manila envelope. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just watched Darnell dig his own grave one sentence at a time. My name is Keisha, and I am 34 years old. For 5 years, I let my husband believe he was the king of our castle while I quietly cleaned up his messes and paid off his debts. He thought he was a real estate mogul. He thought the Rose Trust was a piggy bank filled with cash from my grandmother. He had no idea what was actually in the envelope I was holding. Before I reveal why the judge lost his composure and laughed in my husband's face, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to humble a man who forgot who actually signed the checks. Order in the court. Judge Holloway banged his gavel, his eyes narrowing at Darnell. Mr. Vance, you are stating for the record that you are entitled to 50% of all assets held within the Rose Trust. You are claiming knowledge of these assets and asserting your right to them as marital property. Is that correct? Absolutely, Your Honor, Darnell said, puffing out his chest. My wife has been hiding family money for years. She has deceived me and the court. I demand full transparency and my fair share. I know there is at least $20 million in liquid assets in that trust, and I want half. I stood up slowly. The fabric of my red power suit rustled in the silence. I did not look at Darnell. I looked straight at the judge. Your Honor, if the plaintiff insists on claiming rights to the Rose Trust, I have no objection. In fact, I have brought the full accounting of the trust's current standing right here. Darnell let out a loud, triumphant laugh. See, she is folding. I told you she would fold. Tiffany clapped her hands together giddily. I walked to the bench and placed the manila envelope in front of Judge Holloway. He looked at me over his glasses, then picked up the document. He slid the paper out. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. Judge Holloway read the first line. He frowned. He flipped the page. He squinted at the bottom line. Then his shoulders started to shake. A low chuckle escaped his lips, followed by a loud, uncontained laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. He took off his glasses to wipe a tear from his eye while Darnell looked around in confusion. Judge Holloway looked down at Darnell, a smile still playing on his lips. Mr. Vance, you really should have read the fine print before you demanded half of this. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. 48 hours before the judge laughed in his face, I was walking through the front door of our Buckhead estate. My flight from D.C. bad landed 3 hours early. I usually texted Darnell when I was on my way, but something in my gut told me to stay quiet. I told myself I wanted to surprise him with takeout from his favorite soul food spot, but deep down, I knew I was hunting for something I did not want to find. The house was too quiet. The alarm system was disarmed, which was strange for midday. I dropped my keys in the foyer bowl and the sound echoed off the marble floors. I heard a thud coming from my private study down the hall. My heels clicked against the hardwood as I approached the double doors. They were slightly ajar. I pushed one open, and the scene before me froze the blood in my veins. Darnell was on his knees. He was sweating through his linen shirt. In his hands was a heavy-duty screwdriver, and he was jamming it into the locking mechanism of my grandmother's antique safe. Standing right behind him, whispering instructions, was Tiffany, my brother-in-law's wife. She had a glass of my expensive Chardonnay in one hand and was pointing at the hinges with the other. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" My voice was calm, but it sliced through the room like a blade. Tiffany jumped and spilled wine on my Persian rug. But Darnell did not flinch. He slowly stood up, dropping the screwdriver onto the desk with a loud clatter. He turned around and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He did not look guilty. He did not look sorry. He looked furious. "Finally, you are home." Darnell barked at me as if I was the one who had broken into a bank vault. "Do you know how hard it is to get into this thing, Keisha? I have been trying for an hour." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. "You are breaking into my personal safe, Darnell. In my office." With her. I gestured to Tiffany, who was busy pretending to clean the wine stain with the toe of her shoe. "We need capital, Keisha." Darnell stepped toward me, invading my personal space. "I have a deal closing on Friday. A massive commercial complex in Midtown. I need 50,000 for the earnest money deposit, and your accounts are locked down tighter than Fort Knox. I am your husband. Your money is my money. I should not have to break into a box in my own house to access family resources." Family resources. I repeated the words, tasting the bile in my throat. "That safe contains my grandmother's personal letters and the deed to this house which I bought before I met you. It does not contain a piggy bank for your imaginary real estate deals. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about." Darnell threw his hands up and looked at Tiffany for validation. "She treats me like a child, Tiffany. She emasculates me. I am trying to build wealth for us, and she is hoarding cash like a miser." Tiffany sipped her wine, her blue eyes cold and calculating. She tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear and gave me a pitying look. "You know, Keisha, he is just trying to lead. Maybe if you were a little more supportive and a little less controlling, he would not have to resort to desperate measures. Marriage is a partnership, honey, not a dictatorship." The room spun. My husband was robbing me and his sister-in-law was lecturing me on being a good wife while drinking my wine. I realized then that this was not just a bad marriage, this was a hostile takeover. A partnership requires two people bringing value to the table, Tiffany, and the only thing Darnell brings to this table is debt and audacity. I walked over to the desk and picked up the screwdriver he had dropped. I waited in my hand, watching Darnell flinch. "You are not a partner, Darnell. You are a liability." Darnell's face twisted into a sneer. He stepped back and straightened his jacket, trying to regain the dignity he had lost the moment I caught him on his knees. "You think you are so special, do you not, Keisha? You walk around here with your nose in the air because you fix public relations disasters for celebrities and athletes. You think because you write the checks you get to hold the leash." "I do hold the leash, Darnell, because I bought the dog," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "That is your problem." Darnell pointed a shaking finger at me. "You have no respect. You think your money makes you the man of this house. But let me tell you something. Your money is the only reason people tolerate you. You are cold, Keisha. You are an ice queen. My name, my reputation in this city is what gives us status. Your money is supposed to serve my brand. That is your job as a wife, to fund the vision, to make me look good. Instead, you are hoarding cash in a grandmother's trust fund while I am out here trying to make moves." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Your brand. Darnell, your brand is eviction notices and failed crypto schemes. I have spent 5 years cleaning up your messes so you could play big shot at the country club. I paid off your car note last month so it would not get repossessed during your golf tournament. Is that part of your vision?" Tiffany set her wineglass down on a coaster with a delicate clink. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my messy bun and the comfortable flight clothes I was wearing. "God, Keisha, you are so uptight. Listen to yourself. You sound like a bank manager, not a wife. No wonder Darnell is stressed out. Look at you. You are dry. You are boring. You have zero spark." She walked over to Darnell and brushed a piece of lint off his shoulder, her hand lingering too long. "Darnell needs excitement, Keisha. He needs to flash. He needs capital to show the world who he is. You are sitting on millions and you look like you shop at a discount rack. Frankly, it is embarrassing for him. If I had your money, I would make sure my husband looked like a king. I would not be counting pennies while he suffered." "You are selfish. That is the truth. You care more about your bank account than your husband's dreams." My grip on the screwdriver tightened until my knuckles turned white. So that is it. I am the bank, and you two are the robbers who are upset that the vault is locked. Darnell stepped forward, his eyes hard. It is not robbery when it belongs to me. That trust fund, the Rose Trust. I know it exists, Keisha. I saw the mail from the lawyer. You have been hiding it. That is marital asset. That is my money too. And I am taking what I need to save my business reputation. You can either give me the combination or I will take this house apart brick by brick until I find the papers. You think you are smart, but you are just a stingy woman who does not know how to treat a king. You are forcing me into this corner, Keisha. Darnell wiped his face and looked at me with eyes that shifted instantly from caught red-handed to self-righteous victimhood. He pointed at the scratched metal of the safe as if the damage was a physical wound on his own body. Do you think I want to be on my knees prying open a lock in my own home? Do you think I enjoy this? You stripped me of my dignity a long time ago. This is what desperation looks like, and you are the one who put me here. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my chest, but it was not from heartbreak. It was the same feeling I got when I saw a cockroach in a five-star restaurant. Pure revulsion. I watched him twist the narrative in real time. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Darnell continued, his voice gaining strength as he fed off his own lies. You commit financial abuse, Keisha. That is what this is. You hoard resources. You hide assets. You treat me like a child on an allowance instead of the man of the house. I have vision. I have potential. But you suffocate me. You cut off my oxygen and then you blame me when I gasp for air. I have to beg you for every dime while you sit on a fortune that you did not even earn. You are controlling me with money to make yourself feel powerful because you know you are too cold to keep a man happy any other way. Tiffany chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. He cries to me, Keisha. Did you know that? He calls me at night weeping because he feels so small in this big empty house. It is heartbreaking to watch a strong man be reduced to this. A man needs to feel like a provider, even if he is using family capital to do it. You are crushing his spirit. We were not robbing you. We were trying to liberate him. I looked from one to the other. They were rewriting reality. In their version of the story, I was the villain for protecting my inheritance, and Darnell was the hero for trying to steal it. Darnell stepped closer, his eyes pleading now. I did not want to break the lock, Keisha. I wanted to break the wall you built between us. This is your fault. If you were transparent, if you were a real partner, I would not have to resort to these measures. You made me do this. You made me a criminal. This shame is on your hands, not mine. I stared at him, and for the first time I saw him clearly. He was not just a bad businessman. He was a parasite who believed the host owed him blood. He truly believed that my refusal to be bled dry was an act of aggression against him. Get out, I said, my voice flat. Darnell laughed, a hollow sound. See, you are doing it again, dismissing my pain. I am not going anywhere, Keisha. This is my house too. You forced me to this point, and now you have to deal with the consequences of pushing a good man too far. I pointed a shaking finger at the double mahogany doors and told them to get out of my house right now before I called the police myself. Darnell did not move. He leaned back against my grandmother's desk and crossed his arms over his chest. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face, and he said, "No." I asked him to excuse me. Darnell chuckled darkly and told me I seemed to forget how marriage worked in this state. He said that might be my name on the deed, but this was the marital residence. He reminded me that he had lived there for 5 years and received his mail there, which made him a resident. He told me I could not kick him out without a court order and that trying to force him out would be an illegal eviction. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his eyes locked on mine with a chilling calmness. He pointed out that I was holding a weapon and that I was agitated and shouting. He said that to an outsider it looked like I was the aggressor. He tapped the screen 3 times, dialing emergency services. Darnell put the phone to his ear, and his voice instantly changed. It went from arrogant to terrified in a split second. It was a performance worthy of an award. He screamed into the receiver, backing away from me as if I were a monster. He begged for help, claiming his wife was attacking him. He told the operator I had a screwdriver and was threatening to kill him. He demanded officers be sent to the estate immediately, claiming I was out of control. I stood frozen. The screwdriver was still in my hand where I had picked it up to stop him from destroying the safe. I dropped it onto the carpet as if it were burning hot, but the damage was done. Tiffany gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, and said, "Look at her eyes, Darnell. She has snapped. She is going to hurt us." 10 minutes later, blue lights flashed against the walls of my foyer. 2 officers walked through the door, hands on their holsters. Darnell ran to them, the picture of a battered husband. He sobbed, pointing at me, and claimed I threatened to stab him. He told the officers I went crazy because he asked about our finances. He claimed I had been financially abusing him for years, and that today I finally snapped. He pointed to Tiffany as his witness. Tiffany nodded vigorously, wiping fake tears, and confirmed his story, saying, "I came home in a rage and cornered him with the tool." The older officer turned to me and asked if the screwdriver on the floor was mine. I told him it was my house and explained they were breaking into my safe, so I picked it up to stop them. The officer held up a hand and told me this was a domestic dispute. He said they could not determine ownership on the spot, but they had a report of a weapon and a threat. He confirmed my husband lived there. When I agreed he lived there, but tried to explain, the officer interrupted. He said since Darnell lived there, he had a right to be there. He gave me an ultimatum, saying we could all go downtown to a cell, or one of us could leave for the night to let things cool down. Since Darnell called first, claiming fear for his safety, the officer strongly suggested I find somewhere else to sleep unless I wanted to be booked for assault with a deadly weapon. I looked at Darnell. He was smirking behind the officer's back. He had won this round. He had used the law and his lies to push me out of my own sanctuary. If I stayed, I would be arrested. I told him fine, I would leave, but warned him not to get comfortable. I grabbed my purse and walked out into the cool night air, leaving my husband and his mistress in my home. I sat in my car and watched the police leave. Darnell watched from the window, waving at me. He thought he had taken my castle. He did not know he had just started a war. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Marriott, staring at the dashboard while the heater blasted against my frozen hands. My phone rang, and the name on the screen made my stomach turn. Mother Vance. Darnell's mother. For a split second, a foolish part of me thought she was calling to check on me. Maybe she heard I had been thrown out of my own house. Maybe she wanted to apologize for her son's behavior. I answered the phone and put it to my ear, expecting a greeting, but all I got was a heavy sigh of disappointment. "I hope you are happy, Keisha." Her voice was low and trembling, not with concern but with judgment. "Darnell called me. He is a nervous wreck. He said you pulled a weapon on him in his own home. He said you looked like you were possessed." I gripped the steering wheel. He was breaking into my safe, Viola. He was trying to steal my inheritance with a screwdriver. I picked it up to stop him. "Steal." She spat the word out like it was poison. "How can a man steal what belongs to his family? You have always been like this, Keisha. Stingy, secretive. You think because you have a fancy degree and a crisis management firm that you are better than everyone else? You think you do not have to answer to your husband. This is the problem with you successful black women. You get a little bit of money and you forget your place. You think you are the prize, but you are just a headache." My mouth fell open. I had paid for her hip surgery last year. I had paid off her mortgage so she could retire, and this was how she saw me. "You treat that boy like he is your employee." Viola continued, her voice rising. "You emasculate him. A man needs to feel like a provider, Keisha. He needs capital to build. If you were a real wife, you would have handed him that money with a smile and thanked him for having ambition. Instead, you hoard it like a dragon. You make him beg. No wonder he had to force the lock. You left him no choice. He is a grown man, Viola." I said, my voice shaking. "He is 36 years old. He does not need an allowance, he needs a job. Don't you dare talk about my son like that." She snapped. He is a visionary, but you are too busy looking down your nose to see it. You should learn a thing or two from Tiffany. Now there is a woman who knows how to treat a husband. She is gentle. She is supportive. She does not throw her resume in Marcus's face every time they have a disagreement. She knows that a woman's strength is in her silence and her support. She is white, and she understands our culture of respect better than you do. She knows how to stand behind her man, not in his way. The comparison burned hotter than the heater. Tiffany, the woman who had just helped rob me, was being held up as the paragon of virtue because she knew how to stroke a male ego. Tiffany is a leech Viola, I said coldly. And Darnell is a parasite. You watch your mouth, Viola hissed. You are out on the street tonight because God is trying to teach you humility. You better pray Darnell takes you back. You better go to the bank in the morning and give him whatever he needs to close that deal. If you lose that man, you will die alone, Keisha, and you will deserve it. Now fix this before you embarrass this family any further. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. My mother-in-law did not just take his side, she had given him the playbook. She had raised him to believe that my success was an insult to his manhood and that my money was his birthright. I realized then that I was not just fighting Darnell. I was fighting a generational curse of entitlement, and I was done paying the bill for it. I stood at the front desk of the Marriott the next morning trying to extend my stay for 2 more nights. The clerk smiled politely and swiped my platinum card. Her smile faltered. She tried again, sliding the chip in slower this time. She looked up at me with apologetic eyes and said, "I am sorry, ma'am, but the card has been declined." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. That was impossible. That card had $100,000 limit and I paid it off every month. I handed her my backup gold card. "Try this one, please. It must be a chip error." She ran it. Declined. I stepped away from the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Face ID seemed to take an eternity. When the dashboard finally loaded, I nearly dropped the phone. Red numbers stared back at me. Every single one of my personal credit cards had been reported lost or stolen and frozen by the authorized user. Darnell. He had used his status as my spouse to lock me out of my own credit. But the real horror was the joint checking account. The one I kept funded for household expenses and emergencies. The one that had a balance of $55,000 yesterday morning. It now sat at $12.40. I clicked on the transaction history, my breath catching in my throat. I expected to see a wire transfer to a shell company. I expected to see a withdrawal for a down payment on some imaginary real estate deal. What I saw made me physically ill. A single transaction processed at 9 in the morning, $50,000. The merchant was not a bank. It was not a title company. It read simply Hermes of Atlanta. Hermes. He had drained our liquid assets to buy a handbag. My fingers flew to Instagram. I did not follow Tiffany, but I knew her profile was public because she was desperate for validation. I refreshed her feed. There it was, posted 14 minutes ago. A photo of Tiffany sitting in the passenger seat of my G-Wagon. On her lap sat the iconic orange box. She was beaming, her hand resting possessively on the leather console. The caption read, "Finally, a man who knows how to treat a woman with class. Thank you, Darnell, for the Birkin. Family over everything." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. He did not steal my money to save his business. He did not steal it to pay off a loan shark or cover a debt. He stole $50,000 from his wife to buy a luxury bag for his sister-in-law. He used my money to buy her loyalty. He used my hard work to bribe the woman who helped him break into my safe. The betrayal was so petty, so fundamentally stupid that it transcended anger. He had left me penniless in a hotel lobby to buy a status symbol for a woman who hated me. He thought this was a power move. He thought cutting off my cash flow would make me come crawling back to beg. I looked at the receptionist who was waiting patiently for another form of payment. I did not feel embarrassed anymore. I felt a cold, terrifying clarity. Darnell Vance had made a fatal calculation. He thought the money in that joint account was my lifeline. He did not know it was just my allowance. He had just declared war on a woman who managed crises for billionaires. I put my phone in my pocket and walked out to my car. I had a secret account that Darnell did not know existed, and it was time to make a withdrawal. I walked into the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sovereign Building. My assistant Maya handed me a double espresso before I even sat down. The room was buzzing with tension. On the screen was the face of a senator who had been caught in a compromising position in Vegas. His poll numbers were tanking. His wife was threatening to leave on live television. His campaign manager looked like he was about to vomit on the mahogany table. I did not panic. I did not sweat. I adjusted my silk blazer and looked at the team. Kill the story about the affair. I said, my voice cutting through the noise. We pivot. The senator was not in Vegas for pleasure. He was meeting with a confidential informant regarding the new gambling legislation bill. It was a covert operation. It explains the secrecy. It explains the hotel room. Leak that narrative to the Journal in 20 minutes. Get his wife on the phone and tell her if she stands by him for one press conference, I will negotiate a post-nuptial agreement that secures her assets regardless of the election outcome. The room exhaled. The campaign manager nodded frantically, typing away. Crisis averted. Narrative controlled. This was what I did. I was the woman the powerful called when their lives were burning down. I fixed the unfixable. Darnell thought I was a boring nag who did not understand business. He had no idea that the only reason he was not in federal prison 3 years ago for tax evasion was because I made a call to the IRS commissioner's golf buddy. I dismissed the team and signaled for Maya to stay. She closed the door, and the electronic blinds descended. Maya was the only person in Atlanta who knew exactly how much I was worth. She managed the accounts that Darnell did not know existed. Maya, I said, leaning back in my leather chair, I need you to pull the shadow file on Darnell. Maya paused, her stylus hovering over her tablet. The shadow file, ma'am. You mean the debt restructuring log. I mean everything, Maya. The gambling losses I covered in Macau in 2019. The hush money I wired to that contractor he stiffed on the failed condo project last year. The car payments I made through the shell company so he would not know he was insolvent. Every single time I bailed him out and let him believe it was his own genius that saved him. Compile it. Maya's eyes widened. She knew what this meant. For 5 years I had played the role of the supportive wife from the shadows. I let him strut around Atlanta pretending to be a mogul while I quietly paid the admission fee for his ego. I did it because I loved him. I did it because I thought if I supported him enough, he would eventually become the man he pretended to be. Are we burning him, ma'am? Maya asked quietly. I looked at the empty ring finger on my left hand. I thought about Tiffany laughing in my passenger seat with a $50,000 bag bought with my safety net. No, Maya, I said, coldness settling in my chest. We are not burning him. We are going to audit him. I want to know where every cent of that $50,000 went after Hermes. I want to know who he owes money to right now. And I want you to find out exactly how much debt Tiffany and Marcus are in. If they want to play with my money, I need to know exactly how much they cost. Maya tapped her screen. Consider it done. I turned my chair to look out at the city skyline. Darnell liked to say he owned this town. He was about to find out that he was just renting space in my world, and his lease had just expired. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk like a coiled snake ready to strike. I picked it up and saw a message from Darnell. There was no subject line, just an attachment and a block of text. I tapped the screen and a grainy photograph filled the display. It was taken through a restaurant window 2 nights ago. I was sitting at a corner table at the Capitol Grill with Julian, a senior partner at a rival firm, whom I had been recruiting for a merger. In the photo, Julian was leaning in close, probably to be heard over the jazz music, and his hand was resting on my forearm in a gesture of professional reassurance. To anyone else, it looked like a business dinner. To the court of public opinion, Darnell hoped to manipulate it, looked like an intimate rendezvous. Beneath the photo, Darnell's message read, "Looks cozy, Keisha." Does he know you are a married woman, or is he just another investment? I wonder what the church ladies would say if they saw their perfect crisis manager stepping out on her struggling husband. My stomach churned. He was projecting his own infidelity onto me, twisting an innocent business meeting into a weapon. A second message popped up immediately after. I want 50% of the Rose Trust transferred to Vance Global LLC by noon tomorrow. Have the papers drawn up and sent to Tiffany. If I do not have them signed and notarized, this photo goes to every blog in Atlanta. I will ruin your reputation, Keisha. I will paint you as the adulteress who abandoned her husband in his time of need. You have until 12, tick-tock. I stared at the screen, my hand trembling not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like ice water in my veins. He was blackmailing me. The man whose debts I had paid, whose reputation I had scrubbed clean, was threatening to destroy my career with a lie because he was too lazy to work and too greedy to stop spending. He truly believed that reputation was my weakness because it was his only currency. He thought I would fold to protect my image. He did not understand that my reputation was built on killing giants, not running from them. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city lights. Darnell thought he had cornered a frightened wife. He failed to realize he had just handed a loaded gun to a sniper. He wanted a war over the Rose Trust. He wanted to drag my name through the mud. Fine. I turned back to the desk and looked at the phone one last time. I did not delete the message. I forwarded it to a secure server. Then, with a primal scream of release, I hurled the phone across the room. It smashed against the opposite wall, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks before falling silent on the carpet. I stood there breathing hard, my chest heaving. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. I walked over to the broken device and looked down at it. My reflection in the darkened glass was fractured, but my eyes were steady and cold. Darnell wanted to play dirty. He wanted to bring secrets into the light. I stepped over the broken phone and walked to the door. If he wanted a show, I would give him a finale he would never forget. The silence of a hotel room is deafening when you have been evicted from your own life. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, staring at the beige walls of the Marriott suite. My hands were finally still, but my mind was running a marathon. For the first time in 5 years, I was truly alone. No Darnell to manage. No reputation to scrub clean. Just me and the wreckage of my marriage. I closed my eyes, and I saw her. Nana Rose. The woman who raised me. The woman who built the empire that Darnell was so desperate to steal. I remembered sitting at her feet on the porch of her brownstone in Chicago while she counted cash in stacks so thick they looked like bricks. She was not a soft woman. She did not bake cookies. She collected debts. I remembered the smell of her menthol cigarettes and the weight of her hand on my shoulder. She had warned me about men like Darnell. Men who smiled with their teeth but looked at you like a meal ticket. Keisha, she would say, her voice rasping like sandpaper. Greed is a mouth that never closes. You cannot starve a greedy man, and you cannot reason with him. When an enemy is hungry for what you have, do not fight him for the plate. Feed him. Feed him until he is full. Just make sure what you feed him is poison. My eyes snapped open. Darnell wanted the Rose Trust. He wanted the assets. He wanted the power he thought came with my grandmother's legacy. He had no idea what that legacy actually entailed. He saw a gold mine. He did not know he was standing on a landmine. A cold calm settled over me. It was the same calm I felt before walking into a hostile boardroom. I reached into my bag and pulled out my backup burner phone. I dialed a number I had memorized when I was 12 years old. It rang once, twice, then a voice answered. It sounded like old leather and expensive whiskey. Jawahal. Mr. Jawahal. I said, my voice steady. It is Keisha. There was a pause on the line followed by the rustle of papers. Little Rose, it has been a long time. I assume you are calling because the husband has finally become a problem. He has, I replied. He wants the trust, Jawahal. He wants all of it. He thinks it is a savings account. Jawahal chuckled a dark sound that reminded me of my grandmother. Does he now? And what do you want to do? I looked at my reflection in the hotel mirror. The scared wife was gone. The crisis manager was back. I want to give him exactly what he asked for, I said. Prepare the files, the real ones. We are going to court. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against the hotel nightstand like a jackhammer. It was 6 in the morning. My first thought was that Darnell had found me. My second thought was much worse. I picked up the device and saw hundreds of notifications. My social media feeds were bleeding red. Twitter was trending with my name, but not the way I wanted. #embezzler, #fraud. Anonymous accounts with egg avatars were flooding the timelines of my biggest clients. They claimed I was skimming off the top of crisis management funds to support a secret gambling addiction. They claimed I was funding a 20-year-old boyfriend in Miami while my husband suffered in silence. I knew exactly who was behind the keyboard. The phrasing was specific. One tweet mentioned a private dinner I had with a client in Charleston 3 years ago, a dinner only family knew about. This was Tiffany. She was not just attacking my marriage, she was nuking my career. She knew that in the world of high-stakes crisis management, reputation was the only currency that mattered. If people thought I was dirty, they would not hire me to clean up their messes. She was using the very tools of my trade against me, painting a picture of a loose woman who stole from the rich to feed her vices. My personal line rang. It was Marcus Sterling, the quarterback for the Falcons, and one of my most loyal clients. I answered, hoping for a friendly voice. Instead, I got ice. Keisha. I cannot have this heat on me right now, Marcus said, his voice tight. My agent says these rumors about you stealing escrow funds are everywhere. I know you have handled my scandals, but I cannot be associated with a thief. We are terminating the retainer effective immediately. The line went dead. Then another call came through. Then another. By 7:30, I had lost 3 major contracts worth nearly $500,000 in annual revenue. My assistant Maya texted me in a panic, saying the phones at the office were ringing off the hook with cancellations. The emails were pouring in demanding audits and refunds. I stood in the middle of the hotel room watching my empire crumble in real time. Darnell and Tiffany were not just greedy. They were tactical. They wanted to starve me out. They figured if they destroyed my income, I would have no choice but to liquidate the Rose Trust to survive. They wanted to break me financially so I would sign the papers just to buy groceries. They were trying to cut off my oxygen supply before I even stepped into the ring. I threw on my blazer and looked in the mirror. My eyes were tired but dry. They thought they could shame me into submission. They forgot that I cleaned up scandals for breakfast. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. If they wanted to talk about stolen money, I would give them a conversation about stolen money, starting with the $50,000 currently sitting in Tiffany's closet. They had started a fire, but I was the one who controlled the burn. I pulled my car up to the curb of my office building and saw the chaos through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the lobby. Darnell was not just making a scene, he was staging a full theatrical production. He had somehow bypassed the security turnstiles, likely by flashing that charm he used to hook me 5 years ago. Now he was standing in the center of the reception area, screaming at my front desk staff. I walked through the revolving doors, just as he slammed his hand onto the marble counter. "I want to see the chief accountant right now," Darnell bellowed, his voice cracking with a perfectly rehearsed tremor. "I am her husband. I have a legal right to know where the money is going. She is draining our accounts. She is funneling marital assets through this firm, and I will not stand by while she destroys our future." He looked disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his shirt was untucked just enough to make him look manic and desperate. He turned to the crowd of employees and couriers who had gathered by the elevators. He threw his hands up in the air, his eyes wide and pleading. "My wife is stealing from me," he shouted to a group of strangers. "I supported her while she built this company. I sacrificed my own career to be her rock. And this is how she repays me. She locks me out. She hides the money. She leaves me with nothing. He pulled his wallet out and opened it dramatically, showing the empty leather interior to a security guard who was trying to approach him. Look at this. She cut off my cards. I cannot even buy lunch. Is this justice? Is this how a partner is treated? I am trying to save my family and you people are protecting a thief. My chief accountant David stepped out from the hallway. David was a man who lived for spreadsheets and silence. He looked terrified as Darnell lunged toward him. You! Darnell pointed an accusing finger at David. You are the one helping her cook the books. I know what you are doing. I want to see the ledgers. I demand a full audit of every account associated with the Rose Trust. I know she is hiding millions and I am not leaving until I get the truth. Security finally moved in. Two large guards grabbed Darnell by the arms. Darnell did not fight them with his fists, he fought them with optics. He went limp, letting them drag him like a martyr. Go ahead, throw me out, he screamed as they hauled him toward the exit. Silence the victim. Everyone sees what is happening here. Keisha Vance is a predator. She is a fraud. As they dragged him past me, his eyes locked with mine. For a split second, the mask of the grieving husband slipped. The tears vanished, and a cold, calculating smirk took their place. He winked at me. He wanted this. He wanted the spectacle. He knew that in the court of public opinion, a loud lie was often more powerful than a quiet truth. He had planted the seed of doubt in my own building, and he knew exactly what he was doing. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis ballroom glittered like suspended diamonds overhead, casting a golden glow on the cream of Atlanta's society. This was the annual Onyx Gala, the night where the city's black elite gathered to flaunt their wealth and whisper their secrets. I walked in wearing a simple black gown, my head held high despite the rumors already swirling like toxic smoke in the air. But the breath left my lungs the moment I saw them. There in the center of the room stood Darnell and Tiffany. They were not hiding in shame, they were holding court. Darnell looked devastatingly handsome in a midnight blue tuxedo with a velvet lapel, a suit I had custom ordered for him in Milan last year. On his arm was Tiffany, looking like a vision in shimmering gold silk. The dress was cut low and fit her like a second skin. It was a designer piece that cost more than most people's cars, and I knew exactly whose credit card had paid for it. The irony was suffocating. They were shining using the very resources they claimed I was hoarding. They moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of royalty. Darnell kept a protective hand on Tiffany's lower back, whispering in her ear as they laughed with the city councilman and his wife. To an outsider, they looked like the perfect couple united by a shared burden. To me, they looked like thieves dancing on a grave. I watched from the periphery as they approached Bishop Green, the most influential pastor in the city. Darnell bowed his head respectfully, his face twisting into a mask of deep sorrow. I moved closer, shielded by a large floral arrangement, needing to hear the script they were running. It is just so hard, Bishop Darnell said, his voice pitching perfectly to convey exhaustion and heartbreak. Keisha has been under so much pressure. We are trying to keep it private, but her mental state has deteriorated rapidly. She thinks everyone is stealing from her. She screams at the walls. It is paranoia, plain and simple. I have tried to get her help, but she refuses. I saw the bishop nod gravely, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. His expression was not warm. It was pitying. It was the look you give a madwoman who has wandered out of the attic. Tiffany leaned in, adding her own poison to the well. She touched the bishop's arm gently, her face a portrait of concern. We are just praying for her, Bishop. I have been staying at the house to help Darnell with the domestic duties because Keisha just cannot manage anymore. She locked herself in her office for days. It is terrifying. We are just trying to hold the family together while she goes through this episode. Episode. They were calling my career an episode. They were framing my financial prudence as insanity. They moved from group to group, spreading the infection. They told the hospital board chairman that I was embezzling to fund a secret addiction. They told the debutante society president that I had threatened Darnell with violence in our own home. With every handshake and every fake tear, they were isolating me, pushing me further to the fringes of the world I had built. What made my blood boil was not just the lies, but the audacity of their performance. They were drinking champagne bought with my money, wearing clothes stolen from my accounts, and destroying my reputation among my peers. They were parading their betrayal as if it were a virtue disguised as family support. Darnell was playing the martyr husband standing by his sick wife, while Tiffany played the saintly sister-in-law stepping in to fill the void. She was the white savior in a room full of black excellence, selling a narrative that the strong, independent black woman had finally cracked under the pressure. I stood by the champagne tower watching my social capital evaporate in real time. Former friends turned their backs as I passed, pretending to be engrossed in conversation. A woman I had mentored for years looked straight through me as if I were a ghost. Darnell caught my eye across the room. He did not look away. He raised his glass in a subtle mock toast, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He thought he had won the room. He thought he had turned the city against me. He did not realize that by making such a public spectacle, he had just given me the perfect stage for his eventual downfall. Tiffany glided through the onyx gala like a swan in a pond she did not belong in but owned anyway. Being the only white woman in the inner circle of Atlanta's black elite usually made her an outsider, but tonight she was using her difference as a weapon. She played the role of the humble, concerned observer perfectly. She did not shout her accusations. She whispered them over crystal flutes of champagne, making her poison taste like concern. I watched her corner Mrs. Johnson, the matriarch of the oldest medical family in the city. Tiffany leaned in close, her hand fluttering to her chest as if she was sharing a heavy burden. I could not hear the words from where I stood, but I knew the script. I knew it because I could see Mrs. Johnson's face change. It went from polite curiosity to genuine alarm. She glanced over at me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I moved closer, pretending to admire a sculpture near the bar. Tiffany's voice drifted over the jazz music, soft and trembling. "It is just heartbreaking, Mrs. Johnson," she murmured. "Keisha has always been intense, but lately it is scary. She wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced Darnell is hiding women in the walls. Last week she tore up the master bedroom looking for evidence of an affair that does not exist. She was cutting open the mattress with a knife. Darnell is terrified to sleep in his own bed." Mrs. Johnson gasped, covering her mouth with a gloved hand. "That sounds like a breakdown, Tiffany. Has she seen a doctor?" Tiffany sighed a long, tragic sound. "We have tried. Darnell begged her to see a specialist, but she thinks the doctors are in on the conspiracy. She thinks everyone is against her. She even accused me of trying to steal her identity because I borrowed her car to pick up groceries. It is paranoia, pure and simple, and the worst part is she is handling all these high-profile clients while her mind is slipping. I worry she is going to make a mistake that ruins someone's life." She paused, letting the implications sink in. Keisha was not just a bad wife. She was a professional liability. In this room where reputation was everything, that accusation was a death sentence. "I just wish I could do more." Tiffany continued, wiping a dry eye. "I feel like an intruder in their marriage, but Darnell needs someone sane to lean on. He is holding it together for the cameras, but behind closed doors he is broken. He cries, Mrs. Johnson. He cries because the woman he loves has turned into a stranger who sees enemies everywhere. I am just trying to be the peace in his storm." It was masterful. She had painted herself as the selfless anchor, and me as the unhinged wife destroyed by her own delusions. She used the stereotype of the angry black woman and weaponized it against me, contrasting it with her own performative fragility. She knew exactly which buttons to push to make these women view me as a threat to their own stability. I saw Mrs. Johnson pat Tiffany's hand sympathetically. "You are a good sister-in-law, dear. Darnell is lucky to have family like you in a crisis. We will pray for Keisha. Pray for me." They were praying for my downfall while Tiffany smiled that sweet, innocent smile that hid a row of shark teeth. She looked up and caught me watching. She did not flinch. She raised her eyebrows in a look of faux concern, mouthing the words, "Are you okay?" It was a taunt wrapped in a kindness. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to storm over there and make a scene so she could point and say, "See, I told you she was crazy." I did not give her the satisfaction. I turned away, my heart pounding against my ribs. Tiffany was not just a gold digger, she was an assassin. She knew how to kill a woman's character without ever lifting a finger. But she forgot one thing. Assassins work best in the dark. And I was about to turn on every light in the city. The walk from the Champagne Tower to the exit felt like a funeral procession for my social life. I spotted Renee, a woman I had pledged with at Spelman, and who I had considered a sister for 15 years. I stepped toward her, desperate for one friendly face in a sea of judgment. Renee saw me coming. Her eyes widened, not with joy but with panic. She immediately turned her back to me, pretending to be fascinated by a waiter's tray of hors d'oeuvres. I reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "Renee." She flinched as if I had burned her. She turned around slowly, her smile tight and fake. "Oh, Keisha. Hey, we were just talking about how brave Darnell is. You know, standing by you through all this. We are praying for you, girl. Get some rest, okay?" She did not wait for a response. She grabbed her husband's arm and practically ran toward the patio. The message was clear. I was radioactive. Tiffany's poison had worked faster than I ever imagined possible. She had weaponized my own community against me, using her tears to wash away decades of my integrity. I looked around the room one last time. These were people whose careers I had saved, whose scandals I had buried. Now they looked at me with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, waiting for the crazy wife to explode. I could not breathe. The air in the ballroom was too thick with expensive perfume and hypocrisy. I needed to get out. I kept my head high and walked toward the side exit that led to the valet parking. I refused to run. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me flee. I pushed through the heavy velvet curtains into the service corridor. It was quiet here, away from the jazz band and the chatter. I leaned against the cool wall for a moment, closing my eyes to steady my heart rate. I was about to signal the valet when I heard a voice. It was a hushed, urgent whisper coming from the loading dock alcove just 10 feet away. "Please, man. I just need a little more time." It was Darnell. But it was not the smooth baritone he used on stage. It was high and thin, laced with panic. I moved silently toward the corner, peering through the gap in the service doors. Darnell was standing in the shadows. He was not alone. Looming over him was a man who definitely did not have a ticket to the Onyx Gala. The man was huge, wearing a leather jacket that strained against his shoulders. A tattoo of a scorpion crawled up the side of his neck, disappearing into his hairline. "I do not care about time, Darnell." The man growled, his voice sounding like gravel. "You said the wife would sign the papers this week. You said you had access to the trust." "She is stubborn," Darnell stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "She locked me out of the accounts, but I have her cornered. I swear. She is breaking. I just need a few more days to force her hand. The money is there. Millions. I will pay you double." The man grabbed Darnell by the lapels of his custom tuxedo and slammed him against the brick wall. Darnell let out a choked squeak. "You have 48 hours, the man hissed. "If I do not have my money by Friday night, we are not coming for the money anymore. We are coming for you. And pretty boy, no amount of crisis management is going to fix what we do to your face." The man released him and disappeared into the night. Darnell slid down the wall, gasping for air, pulling at his collar. I stepped back into the shadows, my heart pounding in my throat. This was not just about greed. This was not just about buying Hermes bags for Tiffany. Darnell was in deep. He owed money to people who did not send overdue notices. He owed people who sent broken bones. I walked back toward the main entrance, my mind racing. I realized then that Darnell was not attacking me because he hated me. He was attacking me because he was terrified. He was a drowning man trying to use me as a life raft. And Tiffany was not just a co-conspirator, she was likely the reason he was in this debt to begin with. I had my answer. Darnell was desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. I just had to wait for him to make the fatal one. I waited until Darnell pulled himself up from the brick wall. He checked his reflection in a darkened window, adjusting his tie with shaking hands, then hurried toward the parking garage, instead of returning to the ballroom. I kicked off my heels, carrying them in my hand, and followed him, staying in the deep shadows of the concrete pillars. He did not go to his car. He went to a black SUV parked in the isolated VIP section on the 4th level. The window rolled down. It was not the muscle who had threatened him earlier. It was someone higher up. The boss. Darnell leaned into the window, his posture hunched in submission. I crept closer, hiding behind a concrete column, my breath held tight in my chest. "I told your associate I need 48 hours, Darnell pleaded, his voice echoing slightly in the empty garage. "I have it under control." The voice from the car was smooth-cultured and terrifying. "You are down 500,000, Darnell. The Super Bowl was 2 months ago. You bet heavy on a team that choked, and now you are choking too. My investors are getting impatient. They do not like bad debt sitting on the books. $500,000. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. He had not just made a few bad investments. He had gambled away $500,000 on football games while I was working 80-hour weeks to build a legitimate legacy. He had risked our home, our livelihood, and my reputation on a point spread. I know, Darnell stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with his silk sleeve. But the Rose Trust. It is real. My wife is signing the transfer papers tomorrow. I swear on my mother's life. She is cornered. Once I get access to those funds, I will pay you double. $1 million cash. Just call off your dogs. Give me until Friday. You are gambling with money you do not have again, Darnell, the voice said. You better hope your wife is as submissive as you say she is, because if she does not sign, you are not going to jail. You are going to disappear. The window rolled up and the SUV peeled out of the garage, leaving Darnell standing alone in the exhaust fumes. He kicked the concrete wall and let out a guttural scream of frustration. I shrank back into the darkness, my mind reeling. This changed everything. Darnell was not fighting for dominance, he was fighting for his life. He needed the Rose Trust because it was his ransom money. He had promised $1 million of my grandmother's hard-earned estate to a loan shark just to cover his own stupidity. I watched him trudge back toward the elevator, putting his mask of the grieving husband back on. He thought he was playing me. He thought he could bully me into saving him. But he had just given me the ultimate weapon. I knew his deadline. I knew his desperation. And I knew exactly how to make sure that when Friday came, he would be standing in that courtroom with absolutely nothing to offer his creditors but handcuffs. I waited for Marcus outside the loading dock of the Midtown Distribution Center where he worked as a shift supervisor. It was 2 a.m. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of diesel. Marcus walked out, rubbing his eyes. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a life he clearly did not control. He froze when he saw me leaning against the hood of my rental car. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, eyes wide, and darting toward the exit gate, as if calculating if he could outrun me. "Marcus, we need to talk," I said, my voice low and even. "Do not run. You know I will just find you at home, and I do not think you want Tiffany to hear what I have to say." He slumped against the brick wall, letting out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "Keisha, please. I cannot be seen with you. Tiffany will kill me. She tracks my phone. She checks the dashcam footage. If she knows I talk to the enemy, she will make my life hell." "The enemy." I laughed bitterly. "I am the woman who paid for your daughter's braces, Marcus. I am the woman who covered your rent 3 times last year when Tiffany spent your paycheck on shoes. Since when did I become the enemy?" "Since Darnell said you were hoarding millions," Marcus whispered, looking at his boots. "Look, Keisha, I do not want any trouble. I just do whatever she tells me. You know how she gets. She has a vision. She says we are destined for better things." I stepped closer, invading his personal space. "What vision, Marcus? The vision where you mortgage your house to pay for Darnell's lawyer?" His head snapped up, terror plain on his face. "How did you know that? We have not even signed the papers yet. The bank appointment is tomorrow morning. I know because Darnell is desperate and desperate men talk loud. I lied smoothly. But you, Marcus, you are not desperate. You are just weak. Why are you doing this? Why are you risking the roof over your children's heads for a lawsuit that Darnell is going to lose? He slid down the wall until he was crouching on the pavement. He put his head in his hands. Because she promised me. Tiffany said if Darnell wins, he gets half the trust. That is $10 million, Keisha. She said Darnell promised to give us $2 million if we front him the legal fees now. She says it is an investment. She says we will finally be able to leave this dump and live like you. She wants the lifestyle, Keisha. She hates being the poor relation. She screams at me every night about how unfair it is that you have everything and she has nothing. She says, if we help Darnell break you, we all get rich. I looked down at him. He was pathetic. A grown man ready to gamble his family's security because his wife was jealous of mine. Tiffany was not just supporting Darnell, she was investing in my destruction. She was the architect. Darnell was just the demolition crew. You are going to lose that house, Marcus, I said, my voice devoid of pity. Darnell is not going to win, and when he crashes, he is going to take you down with him. Do not sign those papers. I have to, he sobbed. She said if I do not do this, she is taking the kids and leaving. She said I am holding her back from her destiny. I turned and walked back to my car. There was nothing more to say. Marcus had made his choice. He was trading his home for a lottery ticket that was already expired. Tiffany was steering the ship straight into an iceberg, and Marcus was too afraid to grab the wheel. I sat in my car parked a block away from the warehouse, watching Marcus stumble back inside. The engine hummed beneath me, but my mind was vibrating with a frequency that shattered glass. For weeks, I had been treating Darnell as the general of this war. I thought he was the architect of my misery. I was wrong. Darnell was just the hammer. Tiffany was the hand swinging it. It all made sense now. The precision of the attacks, the calculated isolation at the gala, the specific legal maneuvers that Darnell was too dim to understand, let alone execute. Darnell wanted money to gamble and show off. He was a simple creature with simple vices. But Tiffany wanted something darker. She wanted my life. I remembered the way she would walk through my home, running her fingers over my furniture, like she was appraising it for an auction. I remembered the snide comments about my hair, my clothes, my tone. She hated that I had the power. She hated that a black woman stood at the head of the table while she had to ask for permission to sit down. She had married the spare thinking she could manipulate her way into the dynasty, but she found out the hard way that the vault was locked. She was not just a gold digger. She was envious in a way that rots the soul. She looked at my success as a personal insult. To her, it was a mistake in the natural order of things that I should have the estate, the influence, and the checkbook while she scraped by with Marcus. She believed she deserved it simply because she existed. She was using Darnell to conduct a hostile takeover of my existence. She pumped him up with lies about his manhood and fed his delusions of grandeur, not because she loved him, but because he was the key to the door she could not open herself. She was willing to bankrupt her own husband, destroy her own family's credit, and risk homelessness just for a chance to see me fall. It was not about survival for her. It was about supremacy. She wanted to stand in my foyer holding my grandmother's deed and look down on me. She wanted to correct the error of my success. A cold smile touched my lips. Darnell I could handle. He was a drowning man flailing in the water. But Tiffany was a shark. She was smart, she was ruthless, and she was hungry. But she made one critical error. She assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. She assumed that because I played by the rules, I did not know how to break them. She forgot that I built my empire in a world that wanted me to fail. I dealt with people like her every day in boardrooms and press conferences. I put the car in gear and pulled onto the empty street. Tiffany wanted a war of attrition. She wanted to strip me down until I was nothing. She did not know that I was not just the bank. I was the vault, the security system, and the explosive charge rigged to the door. She wanted my life. Fine. I would give her a front row seat to the show where she lost her own. The target had changed. Darnell was going to jail, but Tiffany was going to lose everything she thought made her better than me. The road leading away from the distribution center was a desolate stretch of asphalt, lined by flickering streetlights that offered more shadows than illumination. I checked my rearview mirror. Twin beams of halogen light were approaching fast. Too fast. I shifted lanes to let the aggressive driver pass, but the vehicle swerved right with me, mimicking my movement. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. This was not a random road rage incident. This was a hunt. I pressed the accelerator, but the SUV surged forward, cutting in front of me at a sharp angle. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching against the pavement as my sedan fishtailed to a halt inches from the other car's bumper. Dust swirled in the red glow of my taillights. The driver's door of the SUV flew open and Darnell stepped out. He did not look like the polished man I had married. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and rimmed with dark circles. His shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, and he was sweating despite the cool night air. He marched toward my car with a terrifying purpose, holding a sheaf of crumpled papers in one hand. He slammed his fist against my driver's side window. The glass shuddered under the impact. "Open the door, Keisha. Open the damn door." I locked the doors and checked the window sill, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Darnell, go home. You are not thinking straight." He hit the glass again, harder this time. "I am thinking perfectly straight for the first time in my life. You backed me into a corner. You cut off my money. You turn my family against me. You think I am playing games. Sign the papers, Keisha. Sign the transfer for the Rose Trust right now, or I swear I will break this window and drag you out." He pressed the documents against the glass. His face was distorted with rage inches from mine. I could see the spittle flying from his lips as he screamed. "You did this. You made me desperate. I owe people who kill for less than what I owe them. If I go down, I am taking you with me. Sign the paper." I looked at his hand. He was not just holding papers. He was reaching into his waistband with his other hand. I saw the glint of metal, a tire iron. He had come prepared to shatter the glass. Fear turned to adrenaline. If I stayed here, I was going to die. Darnell had crossed the line from greedy husband to cornered animal. There was no reasoning with him, there was only survival. He raised the iron, preparing to strike. I threw the car into reverse. The tires spun on the gravel before finding traction. I shot backward, the sudden movement knocking Darnell off balance. He stumbled, the tire iron grazing my hood with a sickening screech of metal on metal. He recovered quickly, screaming my name into the night, running toward me, but I was already shifting into drive. I floored the gas pedal, swerving around his SUV and tearing down the empty road. I did not look back. I drove until my hands stopped shaking enough to grip the wheel without pain. Darnell was no longer just a liability. He was a predator, and I knew in that moment that the only way this would end was with one of us behind bars. I drove back to Buckhead with my heart still racing from the encounter on the highway. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. All I wanted was the safety of my own walls and the security of the alarm system I had paid thousands to install. I pulled into the driveway, and the sight of my house, usually a source of pride, felt like a mockery. The lights were on, all of them. It looked like a party was happening inside the sanctuary I had built with my grandmother's legacy. I walked up the stone steps, my keys in hand, ready to double-lock the deadbolt behind me and call my private security team. I slid the key into the lock. It stopped halfway. I frowned and tried again, jiggling it slightly. It would not turn. I pulled it out and looked at the hardware. The antique bronze finish I had hand-selected was gone. In its place was a shiny, cheap brass lock that looked like it had been bought at a discount hardware store an hour ago. He had changed the locks. I stood there on my own porch, staring at the wood grain of the door I owned. My name was on the deed. My money paid the mortgage. My credit score secured the insurance. But I was the one standing outside in the cold, while the man who had just tried to attack me with a tire iron was sitting on my Italian leather sofa. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was before I even looked. Darnell's message was short and cruel. Do not bother calling the police again, Keisha. I showed them my mail. I established residency. They said this is a civil matter now. This is the marital home and I have possession until a judge says otherwise. Go sleep in your car, it is all you have left. I looked up at the master bedroom window. The curtains were drawn, but I saw a silhouette move against the light. Then another. Tiffany. She was in my room. She was probably going through my closet right now, touching my silk robes and looking in my jewelry box. The violation felt physical, like a punch to the gut. They were not just stealing my money anymore, they were squatting in my life. I raised my hand to pound on the door to scream until the neighbors called the cops, but I stopped myself. That was what they wanted. They wanted the angry black woman on the front lawn, screaming like a banshee while they played the victims inside. They wanted me to get arrested for disturbing the peace so they could use the mugshot in court. I lowered my hand. The humiliation burned hotter than the fear had on the highway. I was a crisis manager who could not manage her own home. I was a millionaire sleeping in a rental car because a failed gambler knew how to exploit tenant laws. I turned around and walked back down the driveway. I did not look back at the house. It was just a building. It was wood and stone and glass. Darnell thought he had won the castle. He did not realize he had just trapped himself inside the target. I got into my car and started the engine. I had one stop to make before I slept, and it was not a hotel. It was time to visit the only man in Atlanta who hated Darnell as much as I did. The address Jawahal gave me led to a nondescript brick building in the historic West End. It was the kind of place you drove past 1,000 times without noticing. I parked my rental car in the alley and knocked 3 times on the steel service door. It opened with a groan, revealing Jawahal standing in the dim light. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He did not offer condolences or pity. He simply stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. The air inside smelled of old paper and cedar. We walked past his main office and stopped at a heavy bookshelf. Jawahal pulled a fake book spine and the shelf clicked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. This was the vault. This was where Nana Rose kept the secrets that built her empire. We descended into the cool air of the basement. Rows of metal filing cabinets lined the walls. Jawahal walked to the back of the room and unlocked a fireproof safe. He pulled out a thick leather-bound ledger and a black folder that looked like it had not been touched in a decade. He placed them on a metal table under a single hanging bulb. "You think you are fighting a losing battle?" Keisha Jawahal said, his voice echoing off the concrete. "You think Darnell has taken your home and your dignity, but you are looking at the board wrong. Darnell is playing checkers. Your grandmother was playing 3-dimensional chess." I touched the leather ledger, asking him what it was. "That represents the true nature of the Rose Trust," Jawahal explained. "Darnell believes the trust is a savings account filled with liquid cash. He thinks he is fighting for a pile of gold coins. But Nana Rose was not a banker, Keisha. She was a lender. A hard money lender. She bought bad debt. She financed high-risk loans for people who could not walk into a bank. The assets in the Rose Trust are not dollars. They are promissory notes. They are liens. They are ownership rights to the desperate souls who signed on the dotted line." He opened the black folder and slid a specific document toward me. I looked down at the paper. It was a loan agreement dated 3 years ago. The borrower was a shell company called Vantex Holdings. The amount was $5 million with compounding interest and strict default clauses. The signature at the bottom was messy but unmistakable. Darnell Vance. I gasped, realizing he had borrowed money from the trust. He did not know it was the trust. Jawahal smiled, a thin, cruel smile. He borrowed from a holding company. He used the money to fund his failed crypto exchange and to pay off gambling debts in Vegas. He has not made a payment in 18 months. He is in default, Keisha. I read the fine print. The collateral for the loan was not just his business assets. It was his personal future earnings and any marital property he acquired. I started to laugh. It bubbled up from my chest, a hysterical release of tension and shock. Tears streamed down my face, but I could not stop laughing. Darnell was fighting to take half of the trust. He was fighting to take ownership of the very entity that owned his debt. If he won half the trust, he would essentially become his own creditor, responsible for collecting the money he owed himself. Nana rose. I whispered, wiping my eyes. You are a genius. You did not just leave me money. You left me a trap, and Darnell just walked right into it. I sat in the rental car outside Jawahal's office, with the black folder resting on my lap like a loaded gun. The temptation to drive straight to the house, kick down the door, and shove the loan agreement down Darnell's throat was overwhelming. I wanted to see his face crumble. I wanted to hear him beg. But Jawahal's voice echoed in my head. Nana Rose played three-dimensional chess. If I showed my hand now, Darnell would run. He would file for bankruptcy or flee the state, and I would be left chasing him for pennies. No. For this to work, he had to claim the prize. He had to stand before a judge and demand his half of the poison. He had to sign his own death warrant. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, channeling every ounce of exhaustion, fear, and heartbreak I had felt over the last 48 hours. I needed to become the woman Darnell thought I was. Weak, emotional, broken. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. My hand trembled, but this time it was a calculated performance. He answered on the second ring. Well, well, well. Look who finally decided to call. Are you ready to apologize, Keisha? I let a sob hitch in my throat. It sounded pathetic even to my own ears. You win, Darnell. I cannot do this anymore. I am sleeping in a car. My accounts are frozen. My clients are leaving. You destroyed me. There was a pause on the line. I could practically hear him smiling. I could feel his ego inflating like a balloon. I told you, Keisha. I told you not to fight me. I am the man of this house. I know what is best. You should have just listened. I know, I whispered, letting my voice crack. I was scared, but I see now that I have no choice. I do not want to fight anymore. I just want this to be over. I want my life back, even if it is just the scraps. So you are ready to sign the transfer papers? He asked, his voice dripping with triumph. I am ready, I said. But not at the house. I cannot come back there, Darnell. I cannot see Tiffany in my kitchen. It hurts too much. Let's do this the right way. Let's go to court. We can ask for an emergency hearing tomorrow. I will tell the judge I consent to the division of assets. I will give you half of the Rose Trust. I just want it legal so you cannot come after me later. Court. He hesitated for a second. Why court? Why not just sign it now? Because I need the judge to unfreeze my personal accounts, I lied smoothly. Lied. If we do it in court, it is immediate. I need money, Darnell. I have nothing. Please just give me that dignity. He laughed. A cruel, satisfied sound. Fine. Court it is. I will have my lawyer set it up for tomorrow morning. Make sure you wear something nice, Keisha. I want everyone to see you hand me my victory. I hung up the phone, and the tears instantly stopped. The shaking ceased. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry and hard as flint. Darnell thought he was walking into a coronation. He had no idea he had just agreed to walk into an execution. I started the engine. It was time to go shopping for a power suit. If I was going to destroy him, I was going to look expensive doing it. I walked into the conference room wearing a gray sweatsuit that had seen better days. My hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and I had deliberately skipped concealer so the dark circles under my eyes stood out like bruises. I wanted to look like a woman who had given up. Darnell was sitting at the head of the glass table next to a man in a sharkskin suit, who I assumed was his shark of a lawyer. Darnell looked like he had already won the lottery. He was grinning, tapping his gold pen on the legal pad, like a drummer keeping time to his own victory march. His lawyer did not waste time on pleasantries. He did not offer me water. He did not ask how I was holding up. He simply slid a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany toward me. Mrs. Vance, we are here to expedite the separation of assets. My client demands an immediate 50% share of all marital property. And when we say all, we mean everything, every account, every deed, every hidden penny. I kept my head down, staring at my chipped nail polish. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller. I understand, I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. I just want this to be over. The lawyer flipped open a folder with a dramatic snap. We are not just talking about the house in Buckhead or the joint checking accounts, Mrs. Vance. We are talking about the full portfolio. He started reading from a list and my blood ran cold. He listed the beach condo in Savannah. He listed the investment account I opened before we were married under my maiden name. He even listed the vintage car collection my grandfather left me stored in a climate-controlled garage 2 counties away. I looked up, my eyes wide with genuine shock. How did you know about the cars? I never told you about the cars. Darnell laughed, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. I told you, Keisha. I have been watching you. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. I know about the cars. I know about the jewelry you keep in the safety deposit box at Chase. I know everything. You thought you were hiding your wealth, but you were just keeping it safe for me. You thought you were so smart playing the humble wife while you sat on a gold mine. The private investigator. That explained everything. He had not just been gambling and cheating, he had been hunting. He had been calculating my net worth while I slept next to him. He had been building an inventory of my life to sell it off piece by piece. I want half, Darnell said, his eyes gleaming with greed. Half the cars, half the jewelry, and half the Rose Trust. The lawyer here says since you commingled funds to pay for the house renovation last year, the trust is fair game. It is marital property now, Keisha. I let out a shaky breath, burying my face in my hands. I needed to hide my face, not because I was crying, but because I was terrified I would start smiling. He was so thorough. He had found every asset I owned, but in his arrogance, he had missed the one thing that mattered. He assumed the assets were free and clear. He did not check the liabilities. Fine, I choked out, forcing a sob to rack my body. Just stop digging, Darnell. Please, I cannot take any more. You win. I will sign whatever you want. Just leave me enough to start over. Darnell smirked at his lawyer. See, I told you she would break. Write it up. I want it all in writing before she changes her mind. I slumped in my chair, looking defeated. Inside, I was counting down the seconds. He had just demanded half of an anchor that was going to drag him straight to the bottom of the ocean. Tiffany was not supposed to be there. This was a confidential settlement meeting between spouses and legal counsel, but Darnell had insisted she remain in the room as his emotional support. Support was a generous word. She looked more like a handler, ensuring her investment paid off. She sat to his right, drumming her manicured fingernails on the glass table, her eyes darting between the stack of asset papers and my defeated posture. She looked like a vulture deciding which piece of meat to tear off first. When the lawyer mentioned the beach condo in Savannah and the vintage car collection, I saw Tiffany's face twist in annoyance. She did not want keys. She did not want deeds. She leaned in close to Darnell, her voice a harsh whisper that cut through the silence of the room like a serrated knife. She told him to forget the hard assets. She hissed that real estate took months to close and required inspections and taxes. She reminded him that they did not have months. Her eyes were wide and frantic as she whispered about liquidity. She needed him to get cash now. She pointed a sharp finger at the line item for the Rose Trust. She told him to make me liquidate the portfolio. She wanted cash wire transfers, not properties that would sit on the market while their debts piled up. She whispered that I was stalling with the houses and that he needed to force the sale of the trust's holdings immediately. I watched Darnell listen to her. He nodded his head like a bobblehead doll, absorbing her greed as if it were wisdom. He was terrified of her. Or maybe he was just terrified of the people he owed money to, and she was the only one offering him a strategy to get paid quickly. He cleared his throat and stopped his lawyer mid-sentence. He slammed his hand down on the table, echoing her instructions almost verbatim. He said he did not want the condo or the cars anymore. He told his lawyer to strike those from the immediate demands. He wanted the trust liquidated. He demanded that I sell the holdings and transfer 50% of the cash value to his account within 48 hours. He said he knew I had connections to expedite the sales. He said he wanted liquid assets, not burdens. Tiffany sat back, a smug smile playing on her lips. She adjusted the collar of her blouse and shot me a look of pure triumph. She thought she was the smartest person in the room. She thought she had just streamlined their payday and outsmarted the crisis manager. She had no idea she had just ordered Darnell to demand cash from a debt collection agency. She had just forced him to demand the immediate liquidation of a ledger that contained nothing but toxic loans and red ink. She thought she was squeezing a lemon for juice, but she was squeezing a grenade. I looked at her and lowered my eyes to hide the satisfaction burning in them. She was so blinded by the sparkle of the gold, she did not notice the dynamite attached to it. She had just escalated her own destruction, and she was smiling while she did it. I reached into my oversized tote bag, pretending to search for a tissue to wipe away my fake tears. My hands were shaking not from nerves, but from the adrenaline of the trap I was about to spring. I pulled out a crumpled Kleenex and allowed a single folded document to slip from the side pocket as if by accident. It landed on the glass table with a soft slap and slid across the polished surface just enough for the header to be visible to everyone in the room. It was a bank statement. A statement I had spent 3 hours forging the night before, using high-quality bond paper and a laser printer. The logo embossed at the top was for the Sovereign Private Bank of Zurich. The account holder name was clearly printed as Rose Trust Holdings, and the bottom line balance was bolded in black ink. $20,450,000. I gasped audibly and snatched at the paper, acting as if I had just dropped a grenade. I moved just a fraction of a second too slow on purpose. Darnell's hand shot out like a cobra and clamped down on the document before I could retrieve it. "Give that back, Darnell," I shrieked, my voice pitching up into hysteria. "That is private. That is confidential. That has nothing to do with this settlement." Darnell ignored me completely. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the lines hungrily. I saw the exact moment the number hit his brain. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost black. His mouth fell open. He stopped breathing for a full second. The air in the room seemed to vanish, sucked into the vacuum of his greed. 20 million, he whispered the words like a prayer. "You have $20 million sitting in a cash account." Tiffany snatched the paper from his hand, tearing it away in her eagerness. "Let me see that." Her eyes widened as she read the figure, and she let out a low whistle. "Oh my God. Keisha, you have been sitting on $20 million while we were struggling to pay the mortgage. You let Darnell drive a leased BMW while you had this kind of capital liquid. You are sick." I buried my face in my hands, sobbing louder to cover the sound of my pulse pounding in my ears. "It is not mine," I wailed. "It is grandmother's legacy. It is supposed to be for future generations. I cannot touch it. It is frozen until I turn 40. Liar Darnell slammed the paper down on the table with a force that rattled the water glasses. "You just said you could liquidate it. You just told us you could get cash. You have been holding out on me. 20 million. Do you know what I can do with $10 million? I can pay off everything. I can be the king of this city." He looked at his lawyer, his face flushed with a manic energy. "Forget the house. Forget the cars. I want half of this account. I want 50% of the 20 million transferred to me immediately. I want it written into the settlement agreement right now." His lawyer looked at the paper, then at me, his expression predatory. "Mrs. Vance, if this asset was acquired during the marriage or commingled, it is subject to equitable division. If you try to hide this, we will subpoena the bank and freeze your passport." I looked up, my eyes wide with terror. Please do not do that. If the trustees find out I tried to hide it, they will lock the account forever. Just stop. I will give it to you. Just do not call the bank. I will sign whatever you want, just do not involve the trustees. Darnell grinned. He looked like a wolf who had just cornered a rabbit. He had no idea the rabbit was holding a shotgun. He thought the 20 million was real. He thought he had found the golden goose. He did not know that the account number listed on that sheet belonged to a defunct shell company with a balance of 0 and a lien from the federal government. He was so blinded by the number, he did not even question why I had a printed statement in my purse. Write it up, Darnell commanded, his voice trembling with excitement. 50% of the Rose Trust cash assets. Now. I lowered my head again to hide my smile. He had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, placed a single document on the table. It was heavy cream-colored stock, the kind used for treaties and death warrants. He slid it across the glass surface with a slowness that was almost theatrical. The room went silent. All eyes were on that piece of paper. It was the addendum to the divorce settlement, the specific transfer agreement for the Rose Trust. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked at Darnell with an expression that was entirely too calm for a man who was supposedly losing his client $20 million. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice smooth and professional. Since you are insisting on the immediate liquidation and division of the Rose Trust assets, we need to execute this transfer of interest immediately. This document legally binds you to the trust. It grants you 50% ownership of all holdings titled under the Rose Trust entity. It also assigns you 50% of all associated responsibilities and obligations attached to those holdings. Once you sign this, there is no going back. You become a co-owner of the entity itself, not just a recipient of a check. Darnell did not even blink. He did not ask what responsibilities meant. He did not ask what obligations meant. He heard 50% ownership and his brain shut down. He reached for the document, his fingers twitching with greed. Give it to me, he said. I know what it means. It means I own half of her money. It means I am finally getting what I deserve. I leaned forward, my hands clasping together in a plea that was worthy of an Academy Award. Darnell, please wait. You do not have to do this. We can just split the cash in the joint account. We can sell the house. If you sign that paper, you are tied to the trust forever. You become part of the legacy. My grandmother was very specific about how the trust operates. If you step into her shoes, you might regret it. Please, just walk away. Darnell laughed in my face. He picked up his gold pen and clicked it open. Regret it. The only thing I regret, Keisha, is not doing this 5 years ago. You are trying to scare me. You think if you talk about legacies and grandmothers, I will get spooked and run away, leaving you with the 20 million. Nice try, but I am not stupid. Tiffany leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the document hungrily. She pointed to the signature line. Sign it, Darnell. She is stalling. Look at her face. She is terrified. She knows she lost. Do not let her talk you out of it. We need that transfer initiated today. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. I looked at my lawyer and nodded slowly, a gesture of utter defeat. Darnell pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of the nib against the fiber filled the room. He signed his name with a massive flourish, underlining it twice. He slammed the pen down and pushed the paper back toward Mr. Sterling. Done, he announced, leaning back and lacing his fingers behind his head. Now where is my money? Mr. Sterling picked up the document and checked the signature. He pulled a notary stamp from his briefcase and stamped the page with a heavy thud. The sound echoed like a cell door slamming shut. The transfer is immediate, Mr. Vance, Mr. Sterling said, closing his briefcase. You are now legally the owner of 50% of the Rose Trust. The liquidation process will begin immediately. You will receive a full accounting of your new assets and the corresponding obligations at the court hearing tomorrow. Darnell smirked at me. I cannot wait. Tomorrow, Keisha, you are going to watch me become the richest man in Atlanta. And you are going to watch me walk away with everything you tried to hide. I stood up, gathering my purse with trembling hands. You got what you wanted, Darnell, I whispered. I hope it was worth it. I walked out of the conference room without looking back. I held my breath until the elevator doors closed. As the car began to descend, I finally let out the breath I had been holding. He had signed. He had not just claimed the assets, he had claimed the obligations, he had claimed the debt. He had just voluntarily signed a legal confession that he was responsible for half of a $5 million default that he himself had created. He thought he had signed a winning lottery ticket. He had actually signed a confession to fraud and a bankruptcy filing all on one page. I opened the door to my hotel suite, expecting the room service waiter with my club sandwich. Instead, I found Viola standing in the hallway, clutching her oversized leather Bible against her chest like a shield. She was wearing her Sunday hat on a Tuesday, which meant she was on a mission. She pushed past me before I could even say a word, bringing the scent of old lavender and judgment into the room. Keisha, baby, she crooned, sitting on the edge of the bed, as if we were best friends having a sleepover. The Lord laid it on my heart to come check on you. I know things are tense with Darnell, but marriage is a battlefield, honey. You have to fight for it, not against it. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I am not fighting, Viola. I surrendered. I signed the papers. Darnell won. What else do you want? Viola's eyes darted around the room, scanning for luggage or documents. She licked her lips. Well, Darnell is worried. He says you gave up too easily. He thinks maybe you are holding something back. You know, for a rainy day. And as a mother, I just want to make sure you are not making a mistake that could land you in legal trouble. If you have any other accounts, honey, maybe offshore, or in a different name, you should tell me. I can help you smooth it over with him. We do not want the government involved, do we? There it was, the pivot from prayer to interrogation. She was not here to save my marriage. She was here on a reconnaissance mission. Darnell and Tiffany had sent her to see if the 20 million was the only pot of gold, or if there were more buried treasures they needed to dig for. They were greedy enough to want the crumbs too. I walked over to the door and held it open wide. Get out, Viola. Her face hardened instantly, the mask of the concerned matriarch slipping to reveal the greedy enabler beneath. You are a hard woman, Keisha. That is why you cannot keep a man. You think your money makes you safe, but it just makes you lonely. My money makes me powerful, Viola. I said, my voice ice cold. Go tell your son I have no more secrets. He got exactly what he asked for. And tell Tiffany to stop sending you to do her dirty work. It is embarrassing for a woman your age to be a messenger girl for a thief. Viola huffed, grabbing her Bible and marching out into the hallway. She muttered a curse under her breath that definitely was not scripture. I slammed the door and locked the deadbolt. They were getting nervous. Good. Paranoia was the first symptom of a guilty conscience. They sensed a trap, but they were too hungry to stop eating. My phone rang at 3 in the morning, piercing the silence of the hotel room like a siren. It was Marcus. I hesitated before answering, knowing that whatever was on the other end of that line was not going to be a casual chat. I slid my finger across the screen and put the phone to my ear. All I heard was the sound of a grown man weeping. It was a guttural, broken sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. Marcus' breath. Tell me what happened. She took it, Keisha. She took everything. His voice was thick with mucus and tears. I went to check the accounts tonight because I had a bad feeling. The college fund, the savings bonds for little Marcus and Jasmine. It is all gone. $80,000, wiped clean. I sat up in bed, pulling the duvet tight around me. Tiffany. Yes, Tiffany, he choked out. She went to the bank this morning while I was at work. She forged my signature on the withdrawal slips. I found the receipt crumpled in the trash can in the kitchen. She wired it, Keisha. She wired $80,000 to Darnell's lawyer. My stomach turned. They were cannibalizing their own children's future to feed their greed. Tiffany was so convinced that the payout from the Rose Trust was coming that she was willing to bankrupt her own family to expedite the process. She treated the lawsuit like a slot machine, pouring every last cent into it, believing the jackpot was guaranteed. I confronted her. Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. She laughed at me, Keisha. She said I was thinking small. She said 80,000 was a drop in the bucket compared to the 10 million we were about to get. She said Darnell promised to triple our investment by the weekend. She looked at me like I was an idiot for worrying about tuition when we were about to be rich. She is delusional. She has spent money we do not have on a dream that is destroying us. I closed my eyes. Marcus was weak, but he loved his kids. He was watching his wife burn down their house with a smile on her face. You need to call the police, Marcus, I said, my voice flat. That is theft. Forging your signature is a felony. You can stop the wire if you act now. I cannot, he sobbed. She said if I call the cops, she will tell them I was in on it. She said she will divorce me and take the kids and tell everyone I am an abuser. She has me trapped, Keisha. Please, you have to stop this. Just give Darnell the money. Please. If you give him the money, he will pay us back and this nightmare will end. I felt a cold resolve settle over me. Marcus was still looking for a savior. He wanted me to pay the ransom for his wife's crimes. He wanted me to open my veins so they could drink. It is too late, Marcus, I said. Darnell signed the papers. The transfer is happening tomorrow. But I am telling you right now that money is never coming back. Tiffany threw your children's future into a black hole. Keisha, please do not do this, Marcus wailed. I am not doing this to you, Marcus. You did it to yourself when you married a woman who loves money more than she loves you. Goodbye, Marcus. I hung up the phone and stared at the dark screen. The collateral damage was mounting. Tiffany had destroyed her own family for a slice of a pie that did not exist. They were all in freefall now, and they had no idea the ground was rushing up to meet them. I sat at the small desk in my hotel room under the buzzing light of a cheap lamp. The black folder Jawahal had given me lay open like an autopsy report. It was time to build the bomb. I reached into the file and pulled out the first document. It was the original promissory note for Vantex Holdings. $5 million borrowed at 12% interest, compounding monthly. Darnell's signature was scrawled at the bottom in blue ink. He had signed it with a flourish, arrogant and careless 3 years ago. I placed it face up on the desk, smoothing out the creases. Next came the collection notices. There were dozens of them. Default warnings. Foreclosure threats on commercial properties he claimed to be developing but was actually letting rot. He had intercepted these letters for years, hiding them from me while pretending to be a mogul. I added them to the pile. Then came the bank records showing the wire transfers to offshore gambling sites. The dates lined up perfectly with the times he told me he was closing deals in Miami or New York. He was not closing deals. He was losing our future on blackjack tables. I found a handwritten note from Nana Rose herself clipped to the back of his file. It was dated 2 months before she died. It read simply, "Watch him, Keisha. He is hungry, but he has no teeth." She had bought his debt not to ruin him, but to hold a leash on him just in case I ever needed to pull it. She had predicted this day from the grave. She knew that eventually his greed would outpace his common sense, and I would need a weapon to put him down. I took a fresh manila envelope from my bag. It was standard legal size, unassuming and yellow. It looked like it could hold a tax return or a recipe. I slid the stack of documents inside. The paper made a dry, rasping sound as it disappeared into the envelope. I tapped the edges on the desk to straighten them. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than paper should feel. It had the density of a gavel. I did not write a name on the outside. It did not need a label. I licked the adhesive strip and pressed the seal shut, running my thumb along the edge to ensure it was tight. The taste of the glue was bitter. Perfect. Darnell was expecting a check. He was expecting a routing number that would give him access to millions. He was walking into court tomorrow thinking he was about to inherit a kingdom. Instead, I was handing him his own obituary. I placed the yellow envelope next to my room key. It was ready. And so was I. The notification light on my phone blinked in the darkness of the hotel room like a warning beacon. It was 11:30 at night. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the Atlanta skyline, and visualizing the moment Darnell's face would crumble. I picked up the phone. It was Darnell. Of course it was. He could never leave well enough alone. He had to gloat. It was his fatal flaw. He needed the audience more than he needed the win. The message was long and dripping with the kind of cruelty that only comes from deep insecurity. I read it slowly, letting every word sink in. Enjoy your last night of pretending to be important, Keisha. Tomorrow you are going to be penniless. The lawyers said once the transfer goes through, I control the accounts, I control the houses, I control everything. But do not worry. I am not a monster. I will let you keep the 2015 Honda. You are going to need something to drive to your unemployment office appointments. Tiffany already claimed the G-Wagon. She says it fits her aesthetic better anyway. Sleep tight, Mrs. Vance. Or should I say, Ms. Nobody. I stared at the screen. He was already dividing up the assets. He was promising my car to his sister-in-law. He was so confident, so assured of his victory, that he was taunting the woman who held the deed to his destruction. He really believed that tomorrow was his coronation. He thought the judge was going to hand him a crown. He did not realize the judge was going to hand him a shovel and tell him to start digging. A week ago, this text would have broken me. It would have sent me into a spiral of tears and panic. I would have called him begging for mercy. I would have offered him anything just to stop the humiliation. But tonight I felt nothing but a cold, detached amusement. It was like watching a man dance on a trapdoor right before you pulled the lever. I did not type out a long defense. I did not remind him that I bought the Honda for his mother 3 years ago. I did not tell him that Tiffany would look ridiculous in a G-Wagon she could not afford to put gas in. I simply typed 4 words. See you in court. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the bed. Let him laugh. Let him show the text to Tiffany, and let them toast to their brilliance with my wine. Let them sleep the deep sleep of the arrogant and the ignorant. Because when the sun came up, they were going to wake up in a nightmare they could never escape. I turned off the lamp and lay down in the darkness. I did not need to pray for justice. I had already printed it out. I waited until the digital clock on the bedside table flickered to 5 in the morning. The city outside was still asleep, but I was wide awake, fueled by a potent mixture of adrenaline and vindication. There was one last call I needed to make. It was the call that would turn a civil divorce proceeding into a federal crime scene. I unlocked my burner phone again and scrolled to a number I had saved years ago during a crisis management case involving a senator and some very questionable campaign funds. The contact simply read, Agent Ross. I pressed the call button. Most people would be asleep at this hour, but I knew David Ross. He lived for the takedown just like I used to live for the save. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep but alert. Keisha, he grumbled. It has been 3 years. You better not be calling to ask for a favor. I am not asking for a favor, David. I said, my voice low and smooth in the quiet room. I am calling to give you a gift, a career-making gift. I heard the rustle of sheets as he sat up. I am listening. I know you have been trying to crack down on the predatory lending rings in Atlanta, I said. The ones using shell companies to secure small business loans and then vanishing with the capital. You have been chasing the small fish, but you never could find the hub. His breathing changed. He was wide awake now. What do you have, Keisha? I have the hub, I replied, staring at the yellow envelope on the desk. I have a paper trail that goes back 5 years. Wire transfers, forged loan applications, tax evasion on a scale that will make your head spin. And the best part is, the man at the center of it is about to walk into a courtroom and confess to all of it under oath because he thinks he is bragging about his assets. Who is it? Ross asked. Darnell Vance, I said. And his associates. They have been washing money through a fake real estate firm called Vantex Holdings. They have defrauded banks, investors, and the IRS. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, he is going to sign a document claiming ownership of the very entity that proves his guilt. There was a silence on the line, heavy with calculation. Then Ross spoke. You want us to arrest him. I want you to wait, I commanded. Let him sign the papers. Let him stand in front of the judge and claim the money. Let him put it on the public record that he controls the assets. Once he does that, he owns the fraud. Then you can come in. I want you in the gallery, David. Bring the cuffs. You are cold. Keisha Ross laughed a dry, impressed sound. Remind me never to cross you. I hung up the phone. The trap was not just set. It was baited with diamonds and surrounded by snipers. Darnell wanted to be a big shot. He wanted to be famous. By noon tomorrow, his face was going to be on every news channel in the state. I walked to the window and watched the sun beginning to crest over the horizon. It was a beautiful day for an arrest. The alarm on my phone did not get a chance to ring. I was awake long before the digital numbers flipped to 6. The hotel room was bathed in the gray light of dawn, but inside my chest, a fire was already burning. For days I had played the part of the broken wife. I had slumped my shoulders and lowered my voice and worn clothes that made me look defeated. I had let Darnell and Tiffany believe they had crushed me. I had let them feed on my perceived weakness like vultures circling a carcass. But today the performance was over. Today the curtain was going up on the final act, and I was not the victim in this play. I was the executioner. I walked to the closet and unzipped the garment bag I had purchased yesterday. The fabric shimmered under the room lights. It was a custom-tailored suit in a shade of crimson so deep and vibrant it looked like fresh blood. It was aggressive. It was unapologetic. It was the kind of suit you wore when you wanted to suck the air out of a room just by walking into it. I slid the trousers on, feeling the cool silk lining against my skin. I buttoned the blazer, watching my silhouette transform in the full-length mirror. The sharp shoulders gave me the posture of a general. The tailored waist showed off the body Darnell had ignored for years. I sat at the vanity and opened my makeup case. This was not a day for the natural look. This was a day for war paint. I applied my foundation with precision, masking the exhaustion of the last week. I drew my eyeliner out into a sharp wing that could cut glass. I chose a lipstick that matched the suit perfectly, a matte red that screamed danger. As I applied it, I thought about Tiffany. I thought about how she used her appearance to manipulate and deceive. Today, I was going to show her what real power looked like. Real power did not need to whisper lies at a gala. Real power stood in the light and dared you to blink. I stood up and smoothed the lapels of my jacket. I looked at the woman staring back at me. She did not look like a wife who had been cheated on. She did not look like a woman who was sleeping in a hotel because her husband stole her house. She looked like a force of nature. I saw my grandmother in the set of my jaw. I saw the legacy of every woman in my family who had survived men like Darnell. I leaned closer to the glass, my eyes locking with my own reflection. Darnell, I whispered into the silence of the room. You wanted a trophy. You wanted a bank account. Today you are going to find out that you tried to rob a dragon. Today you are a dead man walking. I turned away from the mirror and walked to the desk. The yellow manila envelope was sitting there right where I had left it. It looked so innocent. Just a few sheets of paper inside a cheap paper folder. But I knew the weight of it. It held the truth. It held the debt. It held the end of Darnell Vance. I picked it up and slid it into my leather briefcase. I put on my sunglasses even though it was not bright outside yet. I grabbed my room key and walked to the door. My heels clicked against the floor with a rhythmic military cadence. Click, click, click. Every step was a countdown. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, not looking back. The time for hiding was over. It was time to go to court. I pushed open the double doors of courtroom 4B, and the heavy oak swung inward with a groan that sounded like a warning. The air inside was usually stale and quiet, but today it buzzed with the frenetic energy of a high school reunion. I paused at the threshold, letting the scene wash over me. The left side of the gallery was packed. Darnell had not just brought a lawyer, he had brought an audience. He had packed the benches with a cheering section for his own robbery. In the front row sat Viola, my mother-in-law, wearing a hat so large and elaborate it practically violated fire codes. She was fanning herself with a church bulletin, looking around the room with a pious smugness, as if she were waiting for the choir to start. She caught my eye and offered a tight, pitying smile, the kind you give to a sinner before you cast the first stone. Next to her was Marcus, looking like he wanted to crawl under the bench and dissolve into the floorboards. He kept wringing his hands, his eyes darting toward the exit. He knew the cost of this day, even if no one else did. And then there was Tiffany. She sat right behind the defense table, leaning forward so her chin almost rested on Darnell's shoulder. She wore a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal, and she was whispering into Darnell's ear, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She looked radiant with greed. She was scanning the room like a queen, surveying her new kingdom, calculating the value of the wood paneling and the judge's chair. She looked at me and smirked, a cold expression that said, "I won." Darnell was the centerpiece of this circus. He sat at the defendant's table, leaning back in his chair, with one arm draped over the backrest. He was laughing at something his lawyer said, slapping the mahogany table as if they were sharing a joke at a bar. He did not look like a man facing the dissolution of his marriage. He looked like a man waiting for a lottery check presentation. He looked at his watch, then at the door, then at his friends in the back row. I saw his fraternity brothers there snickering and pointing at me. They thought they were about to watch a takedown. They thought they were witnessing the humbling of the ice queen who had controlled their friend for too long. Then Darnell saw me. His eyes swept over my crimson suit. For a split second, I saw confusion flicker across his face. He expected the broken woman in sweats he had seen at the lawyer's office. He expected the victim who had begged him to stop digging. But the confusion vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by his massive ego. He winked. He actually winked at me across the courtroom. He mouthed the words almost over. I walked to my solitary table, my heels clicking on the floor with a rhythmic military cadence. I did not look back at them. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. They were dissecting me. They were already spending my money in their heads. I sat down and placed the yellow manila envelope on the table. It sat there innocuous and flat. Just paper. But to me, it looked like a guillotine blade waiting for the rope to be cut. The bailiff called out, "All rise." The room shuffled to its feet. Darnell stood up straighter than anyone, puffing out his chest. He was ready to be king. I stood up too, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. I was not here to bow. I was here to conquer. Your Honor, my client stands before you, a broken man. Darnell's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, adjusted his silk tie and leaned onto the podium. He had the kind of voice that sounded expensive and slippery like oil on pavement. He pointed a manicured finger at me, not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. We are here today, not just to dissolve a marriage, but to rectify a fraud. For 5 years, Mrs. Vance has lived a double life. She presented herself as a struggling partner, building a business brick by brick, while secretly sitting atop an empire of inherited wealth. She watched her husband toil. She watched him suffer the indignities of financial stress. She watched him beg for resources to support their shared future, all while she held the keys to a kingdom she refused to unlock. Thorne paused for dramatic effect, letting the accusation hang in the air like smoke. He walked toward the judge's bench, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He called it financial infidelity. He said I violated the sacred covenant of marriage, which implies sharing burdens and blessings. He painted a picture of Darnell as a hard-working visionary who was shackled by a wife who did not believe in him. He claimed I used money as a weapon of control. He said I hid the Rose Trust specifically to emasculate him, to keep him dependent and submissive. It was a compelling story. If I did not know Darnell, I might have even felt sorry for him. I heard a soft amen from the gallery. It was Viola. She was nodding her head vigorously, her hat bobbing like a buoy in a storm. She truly believed her son was a victim. She believed his lies because they fed her own greed. Tiffany leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide with feigned sympathy for Darnell, shaking her head at me in disappointment. Thorne continued, his voice rising in righteous indignation. "We have evidence, Your Honor, that Mrs. Vance has liquidated marital assets without consent. We have evidence she has routed funds through shell companies to hide them from my client. She has breached her fiduciary duty to this union. Therefore, we are not just asking for a divorce. We are asking for punitive damages. We are asking for the immediate and full disclosure of the Rose Trust and an equitable division of its assets, which we estimate to be in excess of $20 million. We ask the court to right this wrong and restore Mr. Vance to the lifestyle he was denied by his wife's deceit." He sat down looking pleased with himself. Darnell patted him on the back, his face a mask of tragic bravery. They thought they had nailed me to the wall. They thought the accusation of hoarding money was the worst thing they could throw at me. They did not realize they were just reading the prologue to their own destruction. I looked at the judge. He was writing something down. His face was impassive. He did not look at me with judgment. He looked at me with waiting eyes. He knew there was another side to this coin, and I was just waiting for my turn to flip it. I watched Darnell take the stand. He walked slowly with his head bowed like a soldier returning from a war he did not start but had to finish. He sat in the witness chair and adjusted the microphone with a trembling hand. He looked at the judge, then at the jury box, which was empty since this was a bench trial, but he played to the empty seats anyway. He took a deep breath and let it out as a shuddering sigh. "It is not about the money, Your Honor," Darnell said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is about the principle. It is about trust. When I married Keisha, I gave her everything. I gave her my heart. I gave her my dreams. I worked night and day to build our life. I sacrificed my own ambitions to support hers because I believed we were a team. I thought we were building a legacy together." He paused to wipe a single tear from his cheek. It was a perfect tear. It rolled down his face, catching the courtroom light just right before he brushed it away with a brave sniffle. "I found out she was lying to me," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I found out she was sitting on a fortune while I struggled to pay the bills. She watched me stress over the mortgage. She watched me lose sleep over our future. And she said nothing. She let me carry the weight of the world while she held the keys to the kingdom. It breaks a man, Your Honor. To know the woman you sleep next to does not trust you. To know she sees you as an enemy instead of a partner." He looked at me then. His eyes were wet, but behind the tears, I saw the glint of cold, hard greed. "I am not asking for revenge," he said, his voice rising. "I am asking for justice. I am asking for what is fair. The law says marriage is a partnership. The law says we share the burdens and the blessings. Well, I carried the burdens for 5 years. Now I want my share of the blessings." He stood up suddenly, gripping the railing of the witness stand. His composure cracked, revealing the raw hunger underneath. "I want half of the Rose Trust," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I know what is in there. I have seen the statements. There is $20 million sitting in that account. $20 million that she hid from me. $20 million that belongs to this marriage. I want my half. I want $10 million transferred to me today. I want every penny she owes me for the years of lies and manipulation. Do not let her walk away with my future." He slumped back into the chair, covering his face with his hands, as if overcome by the sheer magnitude of his own suffering. Viola let out a loud sob from the gallery. Tiffany reached out as if to comfort him from afar. The performance was flawless. If I did not know he was a con artist, I might have believed him myself. He had sold the lie so completely he had almost convinced the room. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had put a specific number on a ghost. He had claimed knowledge of a fortune that did not exist. And in doing so, he had just sworn under oath that he knew exactly what he was asking for. The echo of Darnell's shouting still hung in the air like smoke. He sat there breathing hard, looking like a man who had just run a marathon for justice. The courtroom was silent, waiting for my lawyer to object, waiting for me to scream liar, waiting for the typical divorce court drama where two people tear each other apart over who gets the toaster. But I did not scream. I did not look at my lawyer for help. I stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate. My crimson suit caught the light, making me look like a flame in a room full of gray suits. I walked to the center of the floor, stopping just short of the witness stand. I looked at Darnell. He was still panting slightly, staring back at me with defiance. He expected a fight. He expected me to deny everything. He expected me to claim the trust was untouchable or that the money was tied up in charity. He had his rebuttals ready. He had rehearsed his arguments. I turned to Judge Holloway. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing off the high walls. "I am not here to argue with my husband. In fact, I am here to agree with him." A murmur rippled through the gallery like a wave. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Viola leaned forward, clutching her purse, her eyes wide with suspicion. Darnell frowned, confusion clouding his triumph. He shifted in his seat, unsure if he had heard me correctly. "Mr. Vance is absolutely correct," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on the judge. "I am the sole trustee and beneficiary of the Rose Trust. It exists. It is real, and it is exactly as substantial as he claims." Darnell's confusion turned into a grin so wide it looked painful. He looked at the judge and nodded vigorously, mouthing, "I told you." He thought I was folding. He thought the pressure had finally cracked me, and I was confessing to save my own skin. I turned back to Darnell. "And just to be clear for the record, Darnell, you are stating under oath that you want 50% of this specific entity. You want half of its value, half of its assets, and half of its standing. You are demanding your right to step into my grandmother's shoes as a partner in this trust. Is that correct?" "Yes," Darnell said, almost laughing. "That is exactly what I want. I want half. I want what is mine." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch out. I wanted this moment burned into the memory of everyone in the room. I wanted the court reporter to type every syllable. I looked at the judge. He was watching me closely, his pen hovering over his notepad. He saw the setup. He saw the predator walking into the cage, but he could not stop it. "Very well, Your Honor," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifying register. "Since my husband has made his demands clear and has testified to his knowledge of the trust, I have no further questions. I am ready to grant his request. I am ready to give him exactly what he asked for." Judge Holloway peered over the rim of his spectacles, his gaze heavy and unreadable. He clasped his hands together on the bench and leaned forward until he was staring directly into Darnell's soul. The silence in the courtroom stretched thin like a rubber band about to snap. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over the keys, waiting for the hammer to fall. Mr. Vance, the judge, said, his voice rumbling with a gravity that would have made a smarter man pause. "You have heard your wife's statement. She is conceding to your demand. She is willing to transfer 50% interest in the Rose Trust to you, effective immediately." Darnell grinned, looking over his shoulder at the gallery, as if checking to make sure his audience was catching his highlight reel. "That is right, Your Honor. She knows she is beat." Judge Holloway did not smile back. He picked up a pen and tapped it rhythmically against the wood. "Mr. Vance, the court needs to be absolutely certain you understand the scope of your request. You are not asking for a cash settlement. You are asking to be made a partner in the entity itself. You are asking for 50% of the rights, the assets, and the obligations attached to the Rose Trust." Darnell waved his hand dismissively, as if he were shooing away a fly. "Rights, obligations, whatever you call it, Judge. I want half. I know there are millions in there, and I want my share of the pie." The judge narrowed his eyes. "The obligations, Mr. Vance. That means liabilities. That means debts. That means legal responsibilities. Are you stating under oath that you accept full joint ownership of the trust's entire portfolio, regardless of its nature?" Tiffany leaned forward from the bench behind the defense table, Her eyes were wide and frantic. And, "Say yes," she hissed loud enough for the front row to hear. "Just say yes, Darnell, before she changes her mind." Darnell looked at Tiffany, then back at the judge. He looked like a child who had been told he could have all the candy in the store without being told the price. He stood up straighter, puffed out his chest, and shouted into the microphone. "Yes, Your Honor. I am sure. I want 50% of everything. I want the assets. I want the liabilities. I want the whole package. I am not afraid of responsibility. I am a businessman. I know how to handle money. Just sign the order and give me what belongs to me." Judge Holloway held Darnell's gaze for a long moment. There was no pity in his eyes, only a strange, cold finality. He looked like a man who had just watched someone jump off a cliff after being warned about the rocks below. "Very well, Mr. Vance," the judge said softly. "You have made your position clear on the record. You have demanded it. You have sworn to it. And now you shall have it." I watched Darnell sit back down. He was beaming. He slapped his lawyer on the back. He winked at Tiffany. He thought he had just won the championship. He did not feel the noose tightening around his neck. He did not hear the trapdoor opening beneath his feet. He just heard the sound of his own greed echoing in his ears. I picked up the manila envelope from the table. It felt light in my hand, but I knew it carried the weight of a mountain. I walked toward the bench, my heels clicking against the floor. The sound was the only thing audible in the courtroom. Darnell watched me like a hawk. He was practically salivating, expecting to see a check or a bank routing number. He thought this was the surrender. He thought this was the moment I handed over the keys to the kingdom. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear, "since my husband has so graciously insisted on sharing the burden of my inheritance, I believe it is only fair that he sees exactly what he has fought so hard to acquire. This is the complete and current asset manifest of the Rose Trust." I placed the envelope on the high wooden bench. Judge Holloway looked at me over his spectacles. He did not reach for it immediately. He studied my face, looking for a crack in the armor. He saw none. He saw only the calm resolve of a woman who had already won the war before the first shot was fired. He picked up the envelope. He slid his finger under the flap and tore it open. The sound was sharp, like fabric tearing. He reached inside and pulled out the stack of documents. Darnell leaned forward in his chair, his neck craning to get a look. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a child waiting for a magician to pull a rabbit out of a hat. Tiffany was biting her lip, her eyes wide with anticipation. Even Viola had stopped fanning herself. The entire room held its breath. Judge Holloway adjusted his glasses. He looked at the first page. He frowned. He flipped to the second page. His eyebrows shot up. He flipped to the third page and paused. He leaned back in his leather chair and let out a sound that I had never heard in a courtroom before. It started as a snort, a choked sound of disbelief. Then his shoulders began to shake. He covered his mouth with his hand, trying to maintain his judicial composure, but it was a losing battle. A low chuckle escaped, followed by a loud, uncontained guffaw that echoed off the mahogany walls. The room froze. Darnell's smile faltered. He looked around confused. Why was the judge laughing? Was the amount so high it was funny? Was I richer than even he imagined? Judge Holloway took off his glasses and wiped a tear from his eye. He was laughing so hard he was wheezing. He looked down at Darnell, his face red with mirth. "Mr. Vance," the judge gasped, trying to catch his breath. "You really are a piece of work. In 20 years on the bench, I have seen greed, I have seen stupidity, but I have never seen a man fight this hard to drown himself." Darnell stood up, his face flushing with anger and confusion. "What is so funny, Your Honor? Is it the money? Is there more than 20 million? The judge waved a hand at him, struggling to speak. "Oh, there is 20 million, all right." He slapped the papers on the desk. "But you really should have asked what column it was in." He looked at me, and for the first time his eyes were dancing with amusement. "Mrs. Vance, I assume you are prepared to transfer the title of these assets immediately." "Absolutely, Your Honor," I said. allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. I would not want to keep my husband waiting for his fortune. Judge Holloway looked back at Darnell, shaking his head in disbelief. He picked up the gavel, but he did not bang it. He just pointed at the papers. Miss Vance, you demanded half. You swore under oath you wanted the whole package. Well, congratulations, son. You just won the lottery. But I think you are going to find the payout is a little different than you expected. He handed the stack of papers to the bailiff. Show the plaintiff his prize. Darnell grabbed the papers from the bailiff's hand. He looked down at the top sheet. I watched the blood drain from his face. I watched his knees buckle. I watched the light go out of his eyes as he realized that the rabbit in the hat was actually a rattlesnake, and he had just stuck his hand straight into its mouth. The silence in the room was shattered by the sound of paper crumpling in Darnell's fist. The payoff had arrived. Judge Holloway adjusted the microphone in front of him. The feedback squealed for a split second, causing everyone to flinch, but Darnell did not move. He was staring at the document in his hands, as if it were written in a foreign language. For the record, the judge began, his voice booming with judicial authority. Let the court note that the plaintiff, Mr. Vance, has formally accepted a 50% interest in the Rose Trust. He has done so under oath and with the advice of counsel. He paused, looking over his spectacles at Darnell's lawyer, who was now frantically reading over Darnell's shoulder, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. Now, regarding the assets of said trust, Judge Holloway continued. It appears there has been a fundamental misunderstanding on the part of the plaintiff regarding the nature of this entity. The Rose Trust is not a savings account. It is not an investment portfolio of stocks and bonds. It is a private equity firm specializing in high-risk distressed debt. Specifically, it is a hard money lending institution. A gasp went through the courtroom. Tiffany stood up, her hands clutching the bench in front of her. What does that mean? She shrieked. Where is the money? Judge Holloway ignored her, banging his gavel once for silence. The total valuation of the trust is indeed $20 million based on the face value of the promissory notes held within it. However, the trust currently holds zero liquid cash. Its value is entirely comprised of bad debts that it has purchased or originated. He picked up a sheet of paper from his desk and read from it. The primary asset currently held by the trust, which accounts for the majority of its valuation, is a defaulted commercial loan issued 3 years ago to a company called Vantex Holdings. The principal amount was $5 million. With accrued interest and penalties, the current payoff amount is just over $7 million. Darnell dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. Vantex Holdings. That was his shell company. That was the company he used to funnel money into his crypto scams and gambling habits. The judge looked directly at Darnell. Mr. Vance, are you the principal owner of Vantex Holdings? Darnell could not speak. He just nodded, his eyes wide with horror. Then congratulations are in order, the judge said, his voice dripping with irony. You have just successfully sued your wife for the right to own 50% of your own bad debt. By claiming half the trust, you have essentially become your own creditor. You now owe yourself $3.5 million. And since the trust is a separate legal entity with strict fiduciary duties, you are now legally obligated to collect that debt from yourself or face charges for mismanagement of trust assets. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously. Viola fainted in the front row, her large hat sliding over her face, but no one moved to help her because they were too busy watching Darnell crumble. But wait, there is more, Judge Holloway said, raising his voice over the din. Since you demanded the obligations as well, you are now personally liable for the operating costs of the trust, which include the legal fees for all ongoing collections, including the collection action currently filed against Vantex Holdings. You are literally paying the lawyers to sue you. Darnell looked at me. His face was a mask of pure terror. He finally understood. There was no pot of gold. There was only a mirror reflecting his own failures. I looked back at him, and for the first time in 5 years, I smiled a real, genuine smile. He wanted to be a partner. Now he was. He was a partner in his own destruction. I walked up to the witness stand where Darnell was still slumped over like a balloon that had lost all its air. I looked at the judge, and then I looked at my husband. Let me explain exactly what you just bought, Darnell. You see, my grandmother, Nana Rose, was not just a church lady who baked pies. She was the bank of last resort for half of Atlanta. She was a hard money lender. Hard. When people with bad credit and big dreams got rejected by Chase and Wells Fargo, they came to her. She operated through a dozen shell companies to keep her name off the street, but she funded everything from hair salons to nightclubs. And she never lost money because she always took collateral. Darnell looked up, his eyes glassy. I continued, my voice projecting to the back of the room. 3 years ago, you went to a broker looking for $5 million. You said it was for a commercial development in Midtown. You said you were building a legacy. The broker came to Rose Trust Holdings. We approved the loan because you put up everything you owned and everything you would ever own as collateral. But you did not build a building, did you, Darnell? You took that $5 million and you put it into a crypto exchange that collapsed 6 months later. Then you took the rest and you blew it on high-stakes poker tables in Macau, trying to win it back. The gallery gasped. Viola looked like she was going to be sick. I leaned in closer to Darnell. You defaulted on that loan 18 months ago. The trust has been preparing to sue Vantex Holdings for the full amount plus interest and penalties. That is why I was meeting with lawyers. I was trying to figure out how to handle the fact that my grandmother's estate was about to bankrupt my husband. But now you fixed that problem for me. Since you insisted on owning half the trust, you are now 50% owner of the entity that is suing you. You are literally your own bill collector. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, since Mr. Vance is now a trustee, he has a fiduciary duty to maximize the value of the trust's assets. That means he is legally required to sue himself for the $7 million he owes. If he fails to collect from himself, he can be charged with breaching his fiduciary duty and sent to federal prison for fraud. He has effectively trapped himself in a legal loop where the only way out is to pay the money he does not have. Darnell stared at his hands. He was shaking. He looked at his lawyer, but the shark in the expensive suit was already packing his briefcase. The lawyer knew a sinking ship when he saw one. You wanted to be a big shot, Darnell, I said softly. You wanted to be a partner. Well, welcome to the board. Your first order of business is to figure out how you are going to pay us back, because Nana Rose never forgave a debt and neither do I. The humiliation in his eyes was absolute. He had not just lost, he had exposed himself as a failure, a liar, and a fool in front of the entire city. He realized then that the envelope was not a prize. It was a mirror, and he could not stand what he saw. But I was not finished with the surprises today. I turned my attention to the front row where Tiffany was trying to make herself invisible. She was clutching her purse so tight her knuckles were white. She looked like she was about to bolt. I reached back into the manila envelope and pulled out one final document. It was a single sheet of paper with a raised notary seal at the bottom. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. There is one more detail about the Vantex Holdings loan that is relevant to this proceeding. A loan of this magnitude required a personal guarantor, someone with a clean credit history at the time who was willing to co-sign for Mr. Vance's risky ventures. Darnell looked up confused. He did not remember this part. That was because he was too drunk on champagne the night he signed the paperwork to read the fine print. But I remembered. I remembered seeing the fax come through my grandmother's machine 3 years ago. I walked over to the railing that separated the court from the gallery. I held the paper up so Tiffany could see her own handwriting. Hello, Tiffany, I said softly. Do you recognize this signature? Tiffany's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. She let out a small strangled noise like an animal caught in a trap. For the record, Your Honor, I announced to the room, ensuring the court reporter caught every syllable. The personal guarantor for the $5 million loan. The person who is jointly and severally liable for every single penny of the debt my husband now owns is Mrs. Tiffany Vance. The courtroom exploded. Marcus jumped up from his seat, staring at his wife in horror. "You signed what?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You told me you were signing a car lease. You bet our house on this." Tiffany did not answer him. She scrambled out of the pew, tripping over her own designer heels. She shoved past Viola, who was still fanning herself, and made a break for the double doors at the back of the room. She was fast fueled by the adrenaline of a rat on a sinking ship. She reached the heavy oak doors and pushed with all her might, expecting to burst into the hallway and run until she hit the state line. They did not budge. The bailiff had locked them the moment the judge started reading the asset list. Tiffany pounded on the wood, screaming, "Let me out! Let me out!" She turned around, her back to the door, sliding down until she hit the floor. She looked at me with pure hatred, but beneath it was terror. She realized she was not just broke, she was on the hook for millions she never had, and there was nowhere left to run. I looked down at Tiffany, who was crumpling on the floor like a discarded wrapper, and then I looked at Darnell, who was frozen in the witness stand. The air in the courtroom was electric. It smelled of sweat and expensive perfume turning sour. I turned back to Judge Holloway. My voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of a final judgment. "Your Honor, as the managing trustee of the Rose Trust, I am formally invoking the acceleration clause of the Vantex Holdings loan agreement. Due to the default status and the attempted flight of the guarantor, I am moving for the immediate freezing of all assets associated with Darnell Vance and Tiffany Vance. I want a lien placed on every bank account, every vehicle, and every piece of real estate they own. I want their pockets turned inside out before they leave this building." Judge Holloway did not hesitate. He banged his gavel with a force that made Darnell flinch. "Motion granted. The court orders an immediate freeze on all assets. Bailiffs secure the exits. No one leaves this room until the marshals have secured the property." Darnell stood up, knocking his chair over. "You cannot do this. That is my money. I just won half the trust. You won half the debt, Darnell." I corrected him, my voice cutting through his panic. "And now you are going to pay it. But I am afraid your bad credit is the least of your problems." I nodded toward the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors that had trapped Tiffany suddenly swung open, but it was not freedom waiting on the other side. It was a wall of blue jackets. Agent Ross walked in, flanked by 4 federal officers. He looked exactly as he sounded on the phone. Tired cynicism wrapped in a cheap suit. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Darnell, and then shifting to Tiffany, who was still sobbing on the floor. He walked down the center aisle, the sound of his shoes heavy and ominous. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Viola had stopped praying. Darnell Vance and Tiffany Vance. Agent Ross announced, his voice bored and official. "I am Agent Ross with the Economic Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest." Darnell's face went white. "Arrest? For what? I did not do anything. This is a divorce hearing." "It was a divorce hearing," Ross said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Now it is a federal crime scene. You are being charged with wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. We have the wire transfers, Darnell. We have the forged loan applications. And thanks to your wife, we have the original promissory notes you tried to hide." He snapped the cuffs onto Darnell's wrists. The metallic click echoed like a gunshot. Darnell looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. "You called them. You called the feds on your own husband." I smoothed the lapel of my crimson suit. "I did not call them on my husband, Darnell. I called them on a criminal. And you are right about one thing. You are leaving here with exactly what you deserve." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was louder than any gavel Judge Holloway could have banged. It was a mechanical final sound that signaled the end of Darnell's delusions. Agent Ross spun Darnell around and pushed him against the defense table. His face pressed into the mahogany surface where he had just signed his life away. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions over the railing. The bailiffs were moving to block the aisles, but I stood perfectly still. I watched the man who had promised to love and cherish me squirm like a worm on a hook. Darnell's composure shattered completely. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered on his face for the last hour vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly panic of a man who realized he was not going to the country club for lunch, but to a federal holding cell. He thrashed against Agent Ross, his expensive Italian suit jacket bunching up around his shoulders. Wait, you cannot do this, Darnell screamed, his voice cracking. I am a businessman. I have rights. This is a misunderstanding. Keisha, tell them. Tell them I did not know. I looked at him with eyes as cold as the handcuffs on his wrists. I did not say a word. I just watched. Realizing I was not going to save him, Darnell did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He looked for a scapegoat. He twisted his head around, searching the gallery, until his wild eyes landed on Tiffany, who was still huddled on the floor by the locked doors, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. It was her, he shrieked, pointing a cuffed hand awkwardly toward his sister-in-law. She made me do it. She is the one who found the broker. She told me to forge the applications. I did not want to do it. Tiffany looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. Darnell, stop, she whimpered. Do not tell me to stop. Darnell roared, spitting flying from his mouth. You told me the trust had cash. You told me we could pay it back before anyone noticed. You signed the guarantor papers, Tiffany. It was your idea to come after Keisha. You said she was weak. You said she would fold. Agent Ross jerked Darnell upright. Save it for the interrogation room, Vance. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you start using it. Darnell ignored him. He was manic now, desperate to deflect the blame. She is the mastermind, he yelled at the judge, struggling as two more officers grabbed his arms to haul him away. She wanted the lifestyle. She made me buy the cars. She made me lease the condo. Check her bank accounts. Check her texts. She has been pulling the strings the whole time. I am a victim here. I was manipulated. The image was pathetic. The man who claimed to be the king of Atlanta, who demanded respect and submission, was now crying and pointing fingers like a toddler caught stealing cookies. He kicked his legs as they dragged him toward the side exit, his polished shoes scuffing against the floor. He looked back at me one last time, not with anger, but with begging eyes. Keisha, please, baby, he sobbed. Do not let them take me. I am your husband. We can fix this. I love you, Keisha. I watched the doors swing shut behind him, cutting off his pleas. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. He had walked in wearing a tuxedo, ready to claim a fortune. He walked out in steel bracelets, claiming he was a victim. He had lost his money, his freedom, and his dignity in the span of 10 minutes. And the worst part for him was that he knew I was the one who had opened the door for the agents. I had not just divorced him. I had dismantled him. The king was dead, and he had died screaming. Tiffany saw the writing on the wall the moment Darnell disappeared through the exit. She scrambled to her feet, her white dress now smudged with dirt from the floor. She looked toward the judge's private chamber's door, calculating if she could make it before the bailiffs reached her. But she wasn't fast enough. 2 federal agents stepped into her path, their expressions grim. Wait! She shrieked, backing away, until she bumped into the railing. I didn't sign anything, Darnell is lying. He's trying to frame me. I'm just a housewife. I don't know anything about loans or fraud. She turned to the gallery, scanning the faces for an ally. Her eyes landed on Marcus, who was still sitting in the second row, his head in his hands. Marcus, tell them, she screamed. Tell them I didn't do anything. Tell them Darnell is the one who handles the money. Marcus slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen, but for the first time in years, they weren't fearful. He looked at his wife, the woman who had spent his paycheck before he earned it, who had belittled him in front of his children, who had just gambled their future on a lie. He stood up. His legs were shaky, but he walked toward the railing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the withdrawal slip from the bank, the one Tiffany had thrown in the trash after stealing their children's college fund. "You did sign something," Tiffany Marcus said, his voice quiet but steady in the silent courtroom. "You signed my name." Tiffany's face went white. "Marcus, put that away. Don't you dare. We are a team, remember? We do this for the family." "You did this for yourself," Marcus said, walking past the bar and handing the paper to Agent Ross. "She forged my signature to empty our savings yesterday. She told me she did it. She said it was an investment. She stole $80,000 from our kids to pay for Darnell's lawyer because she thought she was going to get a cut of the trust." Agent Ross looked at the slip, then at Tiffany. "Forgery is a felony, Mrs. Vance, and combined with the loan guarantee documents we have in evidence, it establishes a clear pattern of fraud." Tiffany lunged at Marcus, her nails aimed for his face. "You traitor!" she screamed. "You useless, pathetic little man! I did this for us. I did this because you couldn't provide. You owe me." An agent caught her arm, spinning her around. She fought him, kicking and screaming profanities that would make a sailor blush. She wasn't the elegant socialite anymore. She was a cornered animal. "I want a lawyer," she yelled as they cuffed her hands behind her back. "I know my rights. Keisha set me up. She planned this." I watched from my table. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, exhausting sadness for Marcus. He had finally found his spine, but it had cost him his marriage and his savings. He looked at me, his expression broken. I nodded to him, a silent acknowledgement of his bravery. He had done the hardest thing a man can do. He had chosen the truth over the woman he loved, because the woman he loved had become a monster. As they dragged Tiffany out, she locked eyes with me one last time. "You think you won," she spat. "You're still alone, Keisha. You have all that money and no one to share it with." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I watched the doors close on her, screaming. She was wrong. I wasn't alone. I had my dignity. I had my freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I had peace. The silence that settled over the courtroom was heavy, but it was clean. The rot had been cut out. Now the healing could begin. The sound of the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind Darnell and Tiffany seemed to sever the last thread holding Viola together. She stood up in the front row, swaying like a tree in a hurricane. Her hand clutched her chest over her heart, and she let out a wail that was part prayer and part scream. "Lord Jesus, not my baby." Then she crumpled. It was a slow, dramatic slide down the wooden bench. Her large, elaborate hat tipped over her eyes as she hit the floor. The courtroom gasped. Several people in the gallery rushed forward, but I stayed seated. I watched the bailiff hurry over with a bottle of water. I watched Marcus sit there paralyzed, unable to help his mother, because he was too busy mourning the wreckage of his own life. It took a moment for the smelling salts to work. Viola came to sputtering and coughing. The bailiff helped her sit up on the bench. Her eyes darted around the room, wild and fearful, searching for the son who was no longer there. When her gaze landed on me, her expression shifted from confusion to desperation. I was standing now, calmly gathering my papers and placing the empty manila envelope back into my briefcase. Viola scrambled to her feet. She ignored her dizziness and stumbled toward the plaintiff's table. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman who had just fainted. "Keisha, wait!" she gasped, her voice ragged. "You cannot let them take him. He is my son. He is your husband. You have to fix this." I pulled my arm away, brushing the fabric of my crimson suit where she had touched me. I looked at her with zero emotion. "He is a criminal, Viola, and he is exactly where he belongs." Viola dropped to her knees right there on the dirty courtroom floor. She clasped her hands together, begging, "Please, Keisha. I know I was hard on you. I know I said things I should not have said, but I was just trying to protect my family. You know how much I love him. You have the money. You have the power. You know people. You can make a call. You can get the charges dropped. He will pay you back. I will make him pay you back. Just do not let my boy go to prison. He will not survive in there. I looked down at the woman who had called me stingy, the woman who had told me I was not enough of a woman to keep a man, the woman who had encouraged her son to treat me like an ATM machine instead of a partner. I felt nothing, no pity, no anger, just a cold hollowness where my respect for her used to be. "Get up, Viola," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "You are embarrassing yourself. You spent 36 years teaching Darnell that he was a king who did not have to follow the rules. You taught him that women were resources to be harvested. You enabled his gambling. You covered his lies. You attacked me to defend his incompetence. You did not protect your family. You created a monster. And now the monster is starving and there is no one left to feed him. But we are family," she sobbed, reaching for the hem of my jacket. "God says we must forgive. God also says you reap what you sow," I replied, stepping back out of her reach. I forgave Darnell 1,000 times. I paid his debts. I saved his reputation. And you spit in my face for it. You chose Tiffany because she flattered you. You chose Darnell because he was your golden calf. Well, look where they are now. I turned my back on her, wailing. I walked down the center aisle, my head held high. I could hear her screaming my name, begging me to come back, but I did not slow down. I did not look back. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright sunlight of the hallway, leaving Viola on her knees praying to a God she had ignored while she was helping her son sin. She wanted a savior, but she was looking at the wrong woman. I was done saving people who wanted to drown. It had been 7 days since the gavel fell, and the federal agents dragged my husband and his sister-in-law out of the courtroom in chains. I pulled my rental car up to the curb of the split-level house in the suburbs where Marcus and Tiffany lived. It was a nice house, the kind of house a hard-working family could build a life in. But today it looked like a carcass being picked clean by scavengers. A massive moving truck was parked in the driveway, blocking the view of the garage. Men in blue jumpsuits with asset recovery stitched across their backs were marching in and out of the front door like ants. They were carrying everything. The 70-inch flat-screen television Tiffany had posted on Instagram last Christmas, the white leather sectional sofa she claimed was imported from Italy but was actually from a discount warehouse, the dining room set, the art on the walls, it was all coming out. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my sunglasses. The sun was shining, but the air felt heavy with the dust of a collapsing life. I walked up the driveway, stepping aside as 2 men maneuvered a king-sized mattress past me. I spotted the foreclosure agent standing by the open garage door, holding a clipboard and checking off items with clinical efficiency. "Mrs. Vance," he said, nodding at me. "We are just about finished here. The recovery team has secured the vehicles." I looked toward the street where a tow truck was hoisting a black BMW onto its flatbed. It was Darnell's car, the one I had paid the lease on for 2 years. Next to it was Tiffany's Range Rover. They were being repossessed to satisfy the judgment. But the real prize was sitting on a folding table in the middle of the driveway. It was a collection of luxury handbags, Chanel, Louis Vuitton. And right in the center, sitting in its orange box like a crown jewel, was the Birkin, the $50,000 bag Darnell had bought with my stolen money. It looked ridiculous sitting there amidst the chaos of eviction. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. It was greed wrapped in leather. I walked over to the table and ran my finger along the box. It was pristine. Tiffany had probably worshipped this bag. She had probably slept with it. Now it was just line item number 47 on a seizure manifest. Marcus was sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands. He was not crying anymore. He looked hollowed out. He looked like a man who had survived a bombing only to realize his house was gone. He looked up as I approached. His eyes were red-rimmed and empty. "They took the kids' iPads, Keisha," he said, his voice flat. "They took everything." I looked down at him. I felt a pang of pity, but I crushed it. This was the consequence of signing papers you did not read. This was the price of letting your wife gamble your life away. "You still have your job, Marcus," I said. "You can rebuild, But you have to do it without the lies this time. He nodded slowly, looking at the empty driveway where his wife's car used to be. She really thought we were going to be rich, he whispered. I turned away from him and looked back at the orange box. She was rich, I said. For about 24 hours, she was the richest fool in Atlanta. The foreclosure agent signaled the truck driver. It was time to go. I watched as they loaded the last of the illusion into the back of the truck. The house stood empty behind Marcus, a hollow shell of the pretension that had destroyed it. I walked back to my car feeling lighter than I had in years. The debt was being paid one designer bag at a time. The visitation room of the Fulton County Jail smelled like bleach and despair. I sat on a metal stool looking through the thick plexiglass at the man I had once thought was my future. Darnell shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. His head was shaved and his face was gray with stubble. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a scared boy who had played a man's game and lost. He sat down and picked up the phone. His hands were shaking. "Keisha," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Thank God you came. You have to help me. It is a nightmare in here. They denied my bail. They said I am a flight risk." I picked up the phone on my side. I did not smile. I did not frown. I just looked at him. "I did not come to help you, Darnell," I said calmly. "I came to close the account." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the glass. "Please, baby. I am sorry. I was stupid. I was weak. Tiffany," she twisted my mind. "She made me think I deserved more. But I love you, Keisha. I really do. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I had permission to access the trust. If you testify for me, maybe they will reduce the charges." I watched him beg. It was pathetic. He still thought he could charm his way out of a felony. He still thought I was the woman who paid his car note so he would not feel bad about himself. I slid a blue folder through the document slot. It landed in front of him with a soft thud. "What is this?" he asked, looking at it fearfully. "It is the divorce decree," I said. "Uncontested, irreconcilable differences, and a full waiver of any claim to my assets, my business, or my future. You sign this, Darnell, and I walk away. I do not testify against you at sentencing. I do not push for the maximum penalty on the civil fraud charges. I let the feds handle you. But if you do not sign it, I will make it my life's mission to ensure you die in this cage." He stared at the folder. He looked at me, searching for a trace of the woman who used to hold him when he cried about his failures. She was not there. She had died the night he changed the locks on her house. "You are really going to leave me in here?" he whispered, tears spilling down his cheeks. "With nothing." "You left yourself in here, Darnell," I said. "You had a wife who loved you. You had a home. You had a life most men would kill for. And you threw it away for a handbag and a lie. Sign the papers." He opened the folder. He picked up the cheap prison pen. His hand shook so bad he could barely write. He signed his name on the line. It was not the flourishing signature of the CEO he pretended to be. It was the scratch of a convict. He pushed the folder back through the slot. I took it and stood up. "Goodbye, Darnell." "Keisha, wait!" he called out, pressing his hand to the glass. "What am I going to do?" I looked at him one last time. "You are going to do time, Darnell. Lots of it." I hung up the phone and walked out of the room. I walked out of the jail and into the sunlight. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I had cut the dead weight loose. Now I could finally fly. Tiffany thought the federal charges were the bottom, but the social execution was far worse. The Atlanta blogs were ruthless. They did not just report the fraud, they excavated her entire life. It turned out Tiffany was not her real name. It was just the latest alias in a decade-long string of failed honeypots. She had judgments in Florida and Texas. She had maxed out credit cards in the names of men she had not spoken to in years. The black elite circles she had tried so desperately to infiltrate did not just close the door, they nailed it shut. I heard she tried to go to brunch at Le Bilboquet 2 days after her release on bail. The maitre d' did not even let her pass the velvet rope. He told her they were fully booked while empty tables sat in plain sight. It was the kind of silent shunning that hurt more than a scream. She was radioactive. Her friends deleted her number. The charity boards erased her name from their websites. She was a social pariah with a criminal record and a mountain of debt that Marcus had successfully legally unloaded onto her during their annulment proceedings. But the real justice was not in the blogs. It was in the lobby of the Sovereign building 3 months later. I was there for a meeting with a new client. I walked across the polished marble floors, my heels clicking with the rhythm of success. I saw a figure pushing a heavy cleaning cart near the elevators. She was wearing a shapeless gray uniform that smelled of ammonia. Her hair, usually dyed a perfect blonde, was showing dark roots and pulled back in a messy knot. It was Tiffany. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes widened. For a second, she instinctively reached up to fix her hair before remembering where she was. She was not the queen bee anymore. She was the help. She looked at my suit, my bag, my shoes. She looked at the life she had tried to steal and realized it was light years away. I stopped. I did not say anything. I just looked at the name tag pinned to her chest. It did not say Tiffany. It said Tiff. Just Tiff. Like she was a smudge on the window she was about to wipe down. "You missed a spot," I said softly, pointing to a scuff mark on the floor near her worn-out sneakers. Tiffany gripped the handle of the mop bucket. Her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth, probably to scream, probably to curse me, but she closed it again. She knew she could not afford to lose this job. The restitution payments were garnishing her wages before she even saw them. She was working 60 hours a week just to stay out of jail for violating her probation. Marcus had taken the kids and moved to a different state, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of her own ambition. She looked down at the floor and started scrubbing. I watched her for a moment. The woman who had sneered at my career, who had called me boring, who had tried to bankrupt my family, was now scrubbing the floors of the building where I signed million-dollar contracts. It was not cruelty. It was gravity. She had climbed high on a ladder built of lies, and when it broke, the fall was long and hard. I walked into the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. As the doors closed, I saw her wring out a dirty rag. She finally had the life she deserved, a life of hard work and humility. She wanted to clean up. Now she finally could. The flashing lights of the press cameras used to feel like an interrogation, but today they felt like a coronation. I stood at the podium in the center of the newly renovated atrium of the Rose Building. It was the same building where Darnell had once tried to drag me out by security. Now my name was etched in brass on the wall behind me. The crowd before me was a sea of expectant faces. Many of them were the same people who had turned their backs on me at the Onyx Gala. Mrs. Johnson was in the front row, clapping harder than anyone. The bishop, who had prayed for my sanity, was nodding in approval. They were not there to judge the crazy wife anymore. They were there to worship the new queen of Atlanta business. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the room. For months, the city had speculated about what I would do with the assets recovered from the Vantex Holdings seizure. People assumed I would buy a yacht or a bigger mansion. They assumed I would hoard it, just like Darnell had accused me of doing. They did not understand that money without purpose was just paper. I cleared my throat and the room went silent. For 3 generations, my family operated in the shadows. I said, my voice projecting clear and strong. My grandmother Nana Rose built an empire on the desperation of others because that was the only way a black woman in her time could build power. She was a hard money lender because the banks would not let her in the front door. She bought debt because it was the only asset she could control. But today, the shadows end. I motioned to the large screen behind me. A logo appeared. a stylized rose breaking through concrete. I am announcing the immediate dissolution of the lending arm of the Rose Trust. We are no longer in the business of collecting bad debts. We are in the business of preventing them. Effective today, I am launching the Nana Rose Initiative. This is a venture capital fund dedicated exclusively to women of color who have been denied access to traditional banking. We are not offering loans. We are offering grants. We are offering equity. We are offering the one thing I had to fight for every single day: a chance. The applause was thunderous. It washed over me like a cleansing rain. But I was not doing it for the applause. I was doing it for the woman scrubbing floors across town. I was doing it for the wife hiding cash in a coffee can because her husband controlled the accounts. I was doing it to make sure that no other woman would ever have to build a trap to save herself. I looked down at the first grant check sitting on the podium. It was funded entirely by the liquidation of Darnell's seized assets. The money he had stolen to buy Hermes bags and gamble on football was now going to fund a tech startup run by a single mother from the West End. It was the ultimate alchemy. I had turned his greed into her glory. Maya stood in the wings beaming at me. She tapped her tablet, signaling that the press release had gone live. My phone, which was silent in my pocket, was likely blowing up with interview requests from Forbes and Fortune. I was no longer just a crisis manager. I was a mogul. I was a philanthropist. I was the woman who had walked through fire and come out holding the matches. I stepped down from the podium and the crowd parted for me. I did not walk with my head down anymore. I made eye contact with everyone. I saw fear in some eyes and respect in others. That was fine. I did not need them to like me. I needed them to know that the Rose Trust was no longer a secret. It was a standard. And I was the one setting it. The city of Atlanta looked different from the 50th floor of the new Rose Trust headquarters. It didn't look like a battlefield anymore. It looked like a kingdom. I sat in the high back leather chair, my feet resting on the thick carpet. Across from me sat Jawahal. He looked older and more tired than he had at the beginning of this war, but his eyes were shining. He held a crystal glass of vintage Pinot Noir, the same year my grandmother had bottled before she died. He raised his glass to the light, examining the deep red color. "You did it, little Rose," he said, his voice soft with pride. "You didn't just win. You rewrote the rules. Your grandmother would have been terrifyingly proud." I smiled and took a sip of my wine. It tasted like earth and berries and victory. I didn't feel terrifying. I felt light. The weight of Darnell's debts, the burden of Tiffany's envy, the suffocation of Viola's judgment. It was all gone, washed away by the truth. They wanted to break me, Jawahal. They thought if they pushed hard enough, I would shatter. They didn't know that diamonds are made under pressure. Jawahal nodded slowly. "They mistook your silence for weakness, Keisha. It is a common mistake among loud people. They never hear the avalanche until it buries them." I turned my chair to look at the small framed photograph on my desk. It was black and white, grainy with age. Nana Rose stood on the porch of her first house wearing a Sunday hat and a look that could stop traffic. She wasn't smiling in the picture. She looked ready. She always looked ready. She had built a fortress out of scraps so that I could build a palace out of stone. I picked up the photo and ran my thumb over the glass. "You were right, Nana," I whispered. "You told me that greed makes men blind." Darnell didn't see me. He only saw the dollar signs. He walked right off the cliff because he was too busy counting money he didn't earn. I looked back at the city lights flickering on in the twilight. Darnell was sitting in a cell right now, probably telling anyone who would listen that he was framed. Tiffany was scrubbing floors, wondering where her empire went. Marcus was rebuilding a quiet life for his children. The board was cleared. I put the photo back down. "I learned the most expensive lesson of my life this year," I said to Jawahal. "I learned that you cannot buy loyalty, and you cannot negotiate with cancer. You have to cut it out." Jawahal stood up and buttoned his jacket. He finished his wine and placed the glass on the coaster. You are the matriarch now, Keisha. The Rose legacy is yours. What will you do with it? I looked at the grant applications on my desk. I looked at the future. I am going to make sure that no woman ever has to hide her strength to keep a man, I said. Jawahal walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. Good night, Ms. Vance. Or should I say, Ms. Rose? Just Keisha is fine, I said. He left, closing the heavy door with a solid click. I was alone in the silence, but not lonely. I raised my glass one last time to the woman in the photograph. We taught them Nana. I said, my voice strong in the quiet room. We taught them the most expensive lesson they will ever learn. Never bet against the house. And never ever play games with a woman named Rose. I took a final sip of wine and watched the sun disappear completely, leaving me standing in the light of my own making. The screen of my life didn't fade to black, it faded to gold. Keisha's victory teaches us that silence is often the loudest weapon in a war against greed. Darnell and Tiffany mistook her patience for weakness, believing they could dismantle a woman who had spent her life building fortresses. They learned the hard way that entitlement without intelligence is a fast track to ruin. The ultimate lesson here is profound: never sign a contract you haven't read, and never bet against a woman who knows her own worth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a scream, it's simply giving your enemies exactly what they asked for, and watching them crumble under the weight of it. If you enjoyed watching the hunter become the prey, hit that like button and subscribe for more satisfying stories of justice served cold.